Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Liberian Diaspora Forum Weekly Talk Show. My name is Kafumba and I will be your moderator as usual. My guest tonight, Honorable, excuse me, he said he wants to be called Mr. Not Honorable. So my guest tonight are Mr. Harry A. Greaves, Jr., the former Managing Director of Liberia Petroleum Refining Company, LPRC, and the former Liberian Airport Authority Managing Director, Ms. Ellie Conqueror's fiancé, Honorable George Melvin Johnson. Those are our two guests tonight. On the line from Liberia right at this moment is our first guest, Honorable Harry A. Greaves. Oh, sorry, Mr. I keep saying, let me apologize ahead of time, Mr. Greaves, for every time I say honorable. I'm so used to, being respectful of my guests. On the line with us right at this moment is our first guest, Mr. Harry A. Greaves, Jr., who will be enlightening you, fellow Liberians, mainly here in the diaspora, on many issues of national concerns. Of course, including corruptions, nepotism, and the overall political climate in Liberia. Honorable Greaves, as I told you on the phone, you are more famous than I am, so I would not want to procrastinate your time or our listeners' time by going on and on and on. You are a man that I believe, if not every Liberian, most Liberians know. So with that said, I want to welcome you to the show, and the floor is all yours for your introductory remark, sir.
Thank you, Kafumba. Thank you for the invitation. The issue is corruption, which is a very topical subject right now. And the question is, why is it a hot topic, and why have I been invited to talk about it at this time? After Mrs. Sirleaf fired me from my position as Managing Director of LPRC in September of 2009, I was asked, and I consented, to keep my mouth shut. And I have done so for 4 years. I have been watching things evolve over that period. I have not been in government. I could have had another government job if I chose to. I chose not to, because most of my life actually has been spent in the private sector, contrary to what people think. I have been in the workforce for 42 years. And in those 42 years, I've worked for government of Liberia exactly 2. So 40 years in the private sector. I don't include my stint at LPRC because I ran LPRC as though it were a private company. I didn't run it as though it was part of the government SPOR system. But we'll come back. I digress. So we'll come back to this question of why now. I have sort of held my fire. But for me, the final straw was this LTA lease business. I felt that was just too much, and I couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore, and that's why I decided to speak up. And those of you who read my op-ed piece last week will know the arguments I made. That was not my first time actually having a run-in with the LTA. I had a run-in with them in November of 2012. When they were proposing essentially to shut the country down. They wanted to close Lone Star down for 3 days for very dubious reasons. And I, as a business person, I realized that that would lead to chaos. Lone Star at the time had 1.1 million of the 1.8 million subscribers, GSM subscribers in the country. To close them down would have required you shutting down the airports, shutting down the seaports. Most of the embassies would have had to close down. The government essentially would have had to shut down. But more importantly, you have a lot of people who sell scratch cards. They don't sell scratch cards to make a profit. They sell scratch cards basically to eat day to day. And as I pointed out to the president, the LTA's action would have been tantamount to telling these young people that for 3 days they should go hungry. And I predicted there would be riots in the country. And I had to come down to Jesus' meeting with the president, and fortunately she took my advice and moved from the break. But the issue of corruption sadly has not been tackled this administration. If there was one thing I thought Mrs. Sirleaf would be noted for is tackling corruption. I have had a relationship with this woman for close to 40 years, and it was the one thing I was absolutely, if you had asked me 10 years ago, this is the one thing I would have put my neck on the chopping block to say, yeah, she will not tolerate corruption. But unfortunately, that has not been the case. What is corruption? There are a number of aspects to corruption. Simply put, it is stealing taxpayers' money, getting kickbacks from your position of authority in a government ministry or agency, giving business and getting kickbacks for doing so. Conflict of interest, that is a very common form of corruption. Using your position in government to be on both sides of the equation, being buyer and seller. I have a very, very well-honed moral compass, and conflict of interest situations to me are pretty clear. You can see them a mile away. I'll give you an example. When I was at LPRC, I told my wife that while I was at LPRC, I would not allow LPRC to do business with our company. You know, we have a food service business, PH Rib House, and she was quite upset with me. I mean, she pointed out that long before I even married her, LPRC had been one of her best customers. And I said, yes, I can understand that. I said, but the situation now is that I am managing director of LPRC. LPRC is not a private company. If it were a private company, then, as far as I'm concerned, we will be free to do business with LPRC. But LPRC is a state-owned company. It's taxpayers' money, and I think it's wrong. It would be wrong for me to be doing business with myself. Her response was, well, when John Brown was minister, his wife got all of the catering business for that ministry. To which I responded, John Brown is John Brown, I and me. We all have different values. And for me, that was pretty clear. While I was there, every now and then, I would see an invoice come across my desk for PH Rib House. So I called Yombli Kanga. At the time, she was Kanga. She was my public relations manager. And I told her, I said, Yombli, I explained to you that LPRC cannot do business with my business, PH Rib House, while I am managing director of LPRC. Well, Chief, LPRC does very good work, and when we need something at very short notice, they respond. I said, I understand all of that. One, we'll have to start getting used to second-class food, and I'm serious about this. So in the end, what I did, I called my daughter, who was then Yuku, who was then general manager of the company, and I told her, I said, the very next time you get a request from LPRC to quote, to bid on a job, you do not respond. And that's how I dealt with conflict of interest. The other area is what we refer to as nepotism, which I define as placing close relatives in senior positions in a government entity over which the decision maker exercises control. And again, the way I dealt with that, very simply, when I became managing director, I told my family that if your last name is Greaves or Zakwa, you will get no senior position in LPRC while I am managing director. I don't care how qualified you are for the job. I don't care how good you are. You will not get a job at LPRC while I am managing director. Again, to me, that is pretty clear. You cannot have your family people in senior positions in a government ministry or agency or entity over which you exercise control. It's very different if you're a private company. Yes, in our business, my daughter was general manager, one of my sister worked for, but that is a private company. That is completely different from a taxpayer-funded and a public institution. And you have to make that distinction. So now, the question is, how do you deal with corruption? I don't think Liberians are genetically more disposed to corruption than, say, Germans or Americans or French people. The reason why corruption flourishes in Liberia and not in these other places, and I say flourish, I don't say there is no corruption. There's corruption. Wherever there are human beings, there will always be corruption. But the difference is, in Liberia, there is no cost associated with being corrupt. If you're corrupt, the worst that happens to you in government is you may be dismissed or your name may appear in the newspaper for a few days. What needs to happen, and what has not been happening in this country, we need to investigate, prosecute, and there must be jail time. I repeat, there must be jail time for people who are found to be corrupt, and we must seek restitution, confiscation of property. And to do this effectively, you have to be completely colorblind. You cannot apply these punishments to your friends and your enemies and people you don't know, and then exempt your friends and family. Again, in 1972, 1 year after I graduated from college, in my first job with a lawyer, Counsel C. Sepulveda, we had a situation where one of my brothers allowed himself to be influenced by some of his friends into doing something that was dishonest in relation to a committee that had been set up for us to do fundraising. Well, when we found out, I left the other people alone, and the first person I grabbed and had slammed into South Beach prison was my brother. I'm glad to say we were close, but that's what I did. And after that incident, he has never, ever done anything like that. We have to have a situation where when you find people involved in corruption, whether they are friends and family, you have to act. And you have to act in a dispassionate way. I will tell you again of another situation we had. Recently, we, the citizens of Kokoya, we had a situation where our district superintendent misappropriated $60,000. This was money that we had negotiated with a logging company, of fees for the logging company to pay for the rental of space. This gentleman decided to make off with this money in collusion with two of his district commissioners. We had a mass meeting in the district headquarters in Botota in early November. We appointed a fact-finding committee. That committee went to work, did its homework, gathered the facts, and then we had a second meeting 2 weeks later, at which time we presented the culprits with the evidence, and we resolved to forward the matter to the Justice Ministry for prosecution. On the 3rd of December of last year, our district superintendent, along with two commissioners, were indicted by a grand jury sitting in Banga for misappropriation. They will be prosecuted, and we will follow this through and ensure that there is jail time if they're convicted, and also that there is restitution. The district superintendent was fond of boasting that, yeah, he ate the money, but nothing will come out of it. Why? Because that is the traditional way things happen in this country. On the same day, we had a paramount chief and two other officials indicted by the same grand jury sitting in Banga, this time for misappropriating $20,000 of fees that Lone Star Cell had paid to the district for the rental of space. And I must say again, the paramount chief involved, I consider to be a good friend, but his being a good friend to me did not absolve him of his crime. And so we are pursuing prosecution of him. And until that happens in Liberia on a consistent basis, until public officials know that there is certainty of punishment, that if they steal money, they will be prosecuted and they will end up in jail. Until that happens, we're just playing. We will never deal with the issue of corruption. Now, let's talk about what the impact of corruption is. First impact is taxpayers don't get value for money. If you are signing a contract that is inflated, what you're in fact doing is you're shortchanging the taxpayer. This is taxpayers' money. This is not free money. The other impact is the illicit enrichment of public officials. In my view, public officials are entitled to a decent standard of living. They are not entitled to get rich and feed at the public trough. They are not entitled to get rich at the expense of taxpayers. So if you're in a public position, unless you are a Warren Buffett, a great stock picker, if you are getting rich in that position, chances are you're probably doing something wrong. The last thing is the issue of opportunity cost. When somebody indulges in a corrupt practice, what he is doing is he is denying the taxpayer the benefit of the money that he is stealing or wasting doing things that would be beneficial to the country and the taxpayer. In my article on the LTA, I made a point of saying that, look at the cost, the opportunity cost of an inflated lease agreement. It translates into salaries not paid, into public servants, nurses not being employed, doctors not being employed, schools not being built, clinics not being built. Corruption is not free. It has an adverse impact on the society. And this is why it has to be dealt with. And if we do not deal with it, there is a real danger of civil unrest, because Liberia is a small society. We know what is going on. And when people are unemployed and cannot get a decent living, and they sit and see officials of government engaging in corrupt practices and enriching themselves, it makes them very, very angry, and justifiably so, in my opinion. So I will leave it at that, and then I will field whatever questions people on this call may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greaves. And once again, thank you for honoring our invitation. We are honored. Folks, you just heard our first guest for today, the one that's calling from a million miles away, Honorable, keep saying Honorable, Mr. Harry Greaves, Jr. And now this part of the show is where you get to have a say. So I would now invite you, if you have any question, comment, or concern, by all means, please dial *61 on your phone. Obviously, we have some regular callers on here who knew that before I even made the announcement, because I got a few of those waiting in the queue to ask questions already. To those of you who haven't been on here before or who don't know how it works, all you have to do now that you're here, you just have to dial *61 on your phone, and then I see many of you doing it already, and then your questions will come up to me here, and I'll open up your line so you can have a say. Usually, it's my pleasure to take the first question. Rightly, sometimes my questions are the easiest, and the audience have the toughest question. I just like to begin by once again thanking Mr. Greaves, and I want to ask him. I heard you say from the beginning of your introductory remark that you were made to stay quiet. I'm assuming you were made to do so by the power that be, the government. If that's correct, the question is, why are you coming on now? I know you touched that briefly, but even more important, it would be, why should anyone believe you now? Since if it was possible to make you keep, stay quiet before. So why are you going public now, and why should we believe you now, sir?
I believe there is a time and place for everything under the sun. I was asked to keep quiet about the circumstances of my firing. A lot of people assume I was fired because of corrupt practice. Mrs. Sirleaf, at every opportunity she's had, when she's been asked that question, she has been emphatic that she fired me not because of any corrupt practice, but, and this she hasn't told the public, but she told me, she fired me because I was a whistleblower. There was a junior minister in her office, a certain Aloysius Jaffa, who had come to me to ask for what I considered an inappropriate bribe. It was an attempt at extortion. He asked me to give him $300,000 on a contract that I had negotiated. I refused. I anticipated that our meeting at which he made this request was going to be a shakedown. I told my American lawyer at the time I had a Liberian lawyer, I had a U.S. lawyer that I had appointed for these negotiations, a Canadian firm of petroleum consultants, and I had a GMAP controller who was a French lady appointed by the U.S. government. A lot of people don't know this. But at the time, the 3 years I was at LPRC, I operated under the GMAP program. The GMAP program was a program that the U.S. government insisted that the Liberian government adopt because of the corruption in the transitional government. They were very concerned about this continuing into the new government. So they decided to ring-fence 5 public corporations that were generating money, and mine was one of them. We had a U.S.-appointed controller, and none of us, no managing director of any of these 5 corporations, would spend 1 penny without the concurrence of this U.S.-appointed controller. So for people who say, oh, I stole money, the only way I could have done that is if the U.S.-appointed controller was complicit in such stealing. So all that talk is nonsense. And I decided to hold my peace. And as I said, there's a time and a place for everything. I have watched over the last 4 years, I've watched things unfold in Liberia. I don't like what I have seen, and I decided, when this particular issue came up, I decided, okay, enough is enough. Now I'm going to lend my voice. And I will continue to lend my voice to issues as I see them from here on out.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Greaves. I'll take that. Now let's begin taking calls here from many callers around the nation and Canada and elsewhere around the world. For those of you who just joining us, and so many of you have, let me welcome you to the Liberian Diaspora Forum weekly talk show. We have Mr. Harry Greaves, former Managing Director of Liberia Petroleum Refinery Company, LPRC. So if you have any question, comment, or concern, we are inviting you to that *61. Our first question tonight will come from 1090. Would you please tell us your name, where you're calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves? 1090.
My name is Emmanuel Molu, calling from Minnesota. Honorable Greaves, thank you so much for your explanation. I think the question that I was just about to ask was asked by the moderator, so that should be it. I don't want to waste your time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Molu. Moving on, we'll take our second call from, I believe this is Josh Toto, 9271. Your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves. 9271.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. This is Josh Toto. I'm calling from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And also special welcome to Honorable Greaves.
Okay.
Yeah. My concern and comment, Mr. Green, when you are making your introductory statement, you made mention of some of the key points that if anybody bear the name Greaves and whatsoever, you don't hire them in certain position in LPRC. I don't know why prompt you to make that decision, but I personally feel that if people are qualified to do a particular set of job, no matter their name or family relationship, when they are qualified, they should be given an opportunity. I think that's a thing we need to try to educate people in Liberia when they are not involved in any kind of corrupt practice. And my next concern is when you are at LPRC, a managing director, there was an issue with you with the GSC, the auditing commission, when John Mono was there, and there was a back talks between our Nigerian oil company with certain amount that was measured. I can't really recall the amount, but I don't know how that issue was resolved. And now you are not at LPRC. I don't know whether you can really talk about how you can throw more light on it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Toto. Mr. Greaves.
Let me take the first question, the whole issue of nepotism. To me, the definition of nepotism is employing somebody who is a close relative of yours in a position. In a decision-making position, in a public entity over which you exercise control. Now, I hear the argument about, and we heard this argument in relation to Rob Surley. And in a conversation, I made the point to his close relative that the question of his qualifications was totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. When we were in opposition, I remember the point was made by President Surley when President Talbot wanted to appoint his daughter, Christine Norman, as not a deputy minister, not even a minister, an assistant minister of education, a job for which he was eminently qualified. The case was made to him that this constituted nepotism. When the same President Talbot wanted to appoint his daughter, Wilhelmina went to one of the best medical schools in the world. She was a graduate of McGill. An eminent doctor. When the president wanted to appoint her as a minister in his government, again, President Talbot was told that this was an example of nepotism. When the president decided to appoint Burley Holder, his son-in-law, Wilhelmina's husband, as defense minister to succeed my father, again, he was accused of nepotism. All of these people were eminently qualified for the positions to which they were being appointed. It is not enough for you to be transparent, but you have to be seen to be transparent. And there is a fine line between nepotism and appointing people because of their qualifications. So don't get yourself into that situation where you can be accused of appointing somebody purely because of their family connection. The easiest way to do that is simply not to appoint them. And that's why I told my family, I don't care how qualified you are. There are 18 other public corporations for you to go to get an appointment, and there were 20 ministries. But the one public corporation you cannot come to and expect to be appointed is the one over which I exercise control. Similarly, I told my wife, there were 18 other public corporations that PA Ribhouse can do business with. There are 20 ministries and God knows how many other agencies that PA's Ribhouse can do business with. But the one entity they cannot do business with is the one over which I exercise control. That is LPRC. That, to me, is the clearest way to deal with the issues of nepotism, and conflict of interest. How are you going to explain to the whole world that your brother is qualified for the deputy managing director position that you have appointed him to? How are you going to explain that? For every one person who perhaps agrees with you, there'll be 20 other people who disagree and will say the only reason why he has gotten that job is because he's your brother. So don't put yourself in that position. Now, the issue of NNPC. Now let's talk about, I just want to make a general comment about John Molu. I know some of you people think he was a hero. I just ask you to read the report that the European Commission, who hired John Molu, wrote about the work of the GAC when he was there. It's pretty scathing about the lack of professionalism that was used by the GAC. In this particular case, it's a case, it's a classic case of a little education is a dangerous thing. Mr. Molu had decided, he had read something about options. For those who are in the financial services business, an option is a very specialized financial transaction involving prices being set and things being bought and sold bought at a fixed price and sold at a market price. And that was what he sought to, that was the characterization he sought to give to a transaction that I did with the NNPC. It was a very simple and straightforward transaction. The Nigerian government, it did before me, it did when I was there, and has continued subsequently. The Nigerian government, as a way of helping African governments, they give allocations, oil allocations to governments. Normally, the oil allocation is given to governments that have refineries. So the NNPC may say, for example, they may give an allocation of 30,000 barrels a day of oil to, say, the Tema oil refinery. This is not free. This is the first mischaracterization. This is not free oil. All the government is saying is they guarantee you that you can have access to the oil, but it's sold at market price. It's sold at market price. In our case, we didn't have a refinery. President Obasanjo knew we didn't have a refinery. This was just his way of giving some help. So they gave us an allocation of 10,000 barrels a day. Because we didn't have a refinery, we sold the allocation to an oil trading company. 10,000 barrels a day at today's market price. You are talking about, you're talking about $10 million. We don't have that kind of money. Okay, we don't have that kind of money. Sorry, $1 million a day. So over a 12-month period, you're talking about $300 million. Well, we don't have that kind of money, and it's a very common practice for the person who's getting the allocation to sell the allocation to a third party. In our case, it was one of the big oil trading companies, ADA. And so Mr. Molu, he went to Nigeria. He came, I explained the whole transaction. He didn't believe me. He went to Nigeria. When he went to Nigeria, NNPC explained the same transaction to me. He insisted that both I was lying and NNPC was lying. And my question is, on what basis? No basis. And so they started spreading this false rumor around, and the newspapers got hold of it. Front Page Africa Oil was one of the ones that Harry Greaves has made millions of dollars out of these allocations. After I left, the allocations continued under my successor, In fact, the quantity doubled from 10,000 barrels a day to 20,000 barrels a day, and the same thing was done. And one day, to his credit, Mr. Rodney Steer came to me and he said, Harry, I apologize. I have now found out that what you were telling me in the beginning was true. And I apologize for thinking that you were lying. So that's the explanation for NNPC. It was not great shakes out of a profit of $4 million that we made in the first half of the year. That thing was just a few $100,000 because we were selling the allocation for cents on the dollar. Cents on the dollar. Cents on the barrel. Cents on the barrel. I think the figure was something like 14 cents or 15 cents per barrel that we're getting. So you do the arithmetic. 15 cents multiplied by 10,000 barrels, that will give you $1,500 a day. Multiply that by 365, and you will see there's not a whole lot of change. You know, we made $500,000 on the transaction, but there were people who were insistent that Harry Greaves had made millions and millions, contrary to all of the evidence. They refused to accept, like Mr. Molu, he refused to accept the evidence because he had a preconceived notion in his mind, and he was insistent that he did not want to be confused by the facts. I hope I've answered both questions.
Okay, Josh Toto, if for whatever reason you're still in doubt, by all means feel free to dial *61. If we have time, we will entertain a follow-up question. So many of you just joined us again while Mr. Reeve was speaking, so let me take this time to welcome you to the Liberian Diaspora Forum Weekly Talk Show. As you already know, we have with us Mr. Harry Greaves, former Managing Director of Liberia Refinery Company. All right, so we will take our next question from Mr. Kelebu Gonglo, I believe in Pennsylvania. Mr. Gonglo, welcome to the show. Your question, comment, or concern?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Greaves, how you doing? My name is Kelebu Gonglo.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm happy to get some clarification today that you are actually from Kokoya Bon County, as opposed to Grand Basso that people have speculated all along that you are from Basso. Here are the concerns I have. I listened to you on your renewed zeal for fight against corruption. I'm actually thrilled by that spirit. But I have some few concerns because the time you serve in government, I happen to have also served in government around the same time. And I was key in some of the meetings. You and I sat in a couple of meetings, but you don't know me. I remember when we were renegotiating ArcelorMittal, the railroad, you came to Lands and Mines and made a presentation. I was actually the secretary to the technical committee that sat there for years. I was also secretary to the scrap committee that sat at LPRC when you were trying to scrap the refinery. So I've been closer to some arena, but we don't know each other. But a few things I wanted to clarify to the listening audience. You touched some of it a little bit on the GSC report. The GSC report you're talking about, if you look, for example, on page 13 of that report, apart from the Nigerian oil deal, the GSC report was very clear there that LPRC, I know part of the period might have covered maybe Ellen Snowtown or what have you, because it was 2006 and 2007. No, it didn't cover Ellen Snowtown, it was your time. It talked about financial irregularities. And it said that irregularities amounted to like $13 million US dollar. And $100,360 Liberian. Those are things you could not account for under administration. In our same GSC report, I think this one was Canteri. Okay, this is Canteri. It talk about you justify receiving 1,000 gallons of fuel for your home and 700 gallons of gasoline for your vehicle that runs only in Monrovia. I have concern on that. We can talk the talk, but things that you have control over, like even just making decision that this is public arena, it's not an arena to get rich. I'm going to be realistic. The allocation of fuel, the allocation of gas from top management at LPRC would be at this level, which is reasonable. I mean, you will need to explain to the audience on that. I have serious concern on that. And I'll take you back into your period still. Honorable Dusty Okoli, when you was chairman of the Public Procurement Committee at the legislature, you, Mr. Greaves, I do recall, I can't quote you exact on this one, but I do recall that was the argument. Honorable Dusty Okoli tried to hold a public hearing that LPRC was not created by an act of the legislature, was rather created out of article incorporation that President Salih, when she was finance minister, and Clayton Watterson, they are the two incorporators of LPRC. My understanding was that was the basis for you to even scrap out all of the land deputy or managerial position of LPRC, that you didn't need them. You didn't need a manager, and even for some time you didn't have assistant manager. For some time you didn't have it. On a public outcry before you brought in T. Nelson Williams, whom you personally hired. I mean, it was not a position that you advertised in the newspaper. You personally hired, and you brought in your office as assistant manager. So now you admit that this is a public corporation. If this is a public corporation, how can you unilaterally decide that you didn't need deputy for administration, deputy for fiscal affairs, deputy for operation? These are positions that have been at LPRC from the time it was established. How can under administration these positions were scrapped out on argument that you didn't need them? Because if they were done by the legislature, they would need legislative action in order to repute it. But none of that was able to take place. So you need to address.
Hold on, Mr. Hold on, I'm not cutting. I'm just Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, are you on?
Yeah. I'm
okay. I didn't see your line for a while. You left us. Go ahead, Mr. Clebo. You want to conclude? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the public the listener will want you to address yourself to that also. Then on the Nigerian oil deal, I like the way you explain it. But there is a market area there, which I was in Monrovia, and you yourself, I know you talk about it in the press, but I want for now that you are now at LPRC to explain that there was an excess or lifting of products in the tune of 1 million barrels, more than what was allotted. It's in the GSC report, and according to yourself in the press, you admitted that the company that was doing the lifted more. I don't know whether it was without your permission, or who did they pay excess money to? Did they pay it to you, or did they pay it to someone in Nigeria, or did they pay it to someone higher than you in Monrovia? Please clarify that. It's also in the GSC report. Then on the Japanese oil deal, all these things started under your administration. That is things have gone terribly wrong with the Japanese oil deal. It was meant to help the country. It was meant to help relieve the country of other things, but it has gone terribly wrong in the culture of corruption that our country bleeds while few enjoys. I'm happy that you are part of the chorus, but I'm sure for us to listen to you, these are things that are hanging that I could go on. It's just that this this guy keeps saying make it come to a close. But there are lots of things. Because, for example, the Zakian contract, I will end on this stuff, but let me end on the Zakian contract. When the legislature, you talk about the PPCC Act, it was a contract. When you went to the Supreme Court to stop, to have a stay order on the House, not to get in between you and Zakian, the UK-based company, and LPRC agreement, this contract value was $24.8 million. This is something that will require the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Justice being signatory to this contract. It will require the legislature ratifying. But you see, it was just a contract. A contract that valued $24 million. It can't be between public corporation and one or non-public actor somewhere, and you justify that. I would like to see the sources of law in Liberia that support your position when you went to the Supreme Court. Please clarify on the Zakian contract, because, for example, in that contract, the Zakian company, Alobenki Kinwari, once you are foreign minister, and I'm very certain without doubt, Mr. Greaves, you are aware of this. As foreign minister, she wrote President Salif. I was in government. I have privilege. I mean, I'm not close to the president. I was way down there as assistant minister. But Liberia is a small country. So that letter circulated in the press. She wrote the president and requesting her not to allow the governor of Liberia to deal with Zakian because Zakian was involved in the seizure of the Liberian embassy in Nairobi and turned it into a school. And it was not a reputable group. They were a group just of fortune hunters just going around the world and making money. The government should be mindful of that. But you went ahead against the foreign minister advice and entered into agreement. So these are lots of issues that I want you to please address.
All right, Mr. Gonglo, let's give Mr. Greaves a chance to address himself to that. And since the questions you're so loaded, I'm going to keep you in the queue. I'll mute you, but I'll not take you out of here just in case we need quick clarification on some of the things you raised. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours, sir.
There are lots of questions, and I could spend another hour answering all of them. I will go in reverse order. First of all, I think, Mr. Gonglo, there are many misstatements of fact in your statement. Zakian did not seize the Liberian embassy. Olubanku King got in and was somewhat impetuous. What had actually happened was the embassy of Liberia had been sold by the previous ambassador before Mr. Zakian even came on the scene, because the ambassador said the Liberian government owed him money, for per diem and all that. Sold the embassy. Mr. Zakian, when he was appointed as not an ambassador, as honorary consul, the Liberian government asked him to try and recover the embassy. Mr. Zakian instituted a lawsuit against the buyer at his own expense. He then he then got some premises which he leased again at his own expense for the consulate. And the understanding was that he would reimburse himself for the cost of these new facilities plus the expenses incurred from consular fees. When Banky made these accusations, at the time we're in the terminal stages of negotiating the Zakian contract. First of all, what one brother did in one part of the world was totally irrelevant, in our view, totally irrelevant to this contract we were negotiating in Liberia that had absolutely nothing to do with him. The fact that he just happened to be a brother of the founder of the company was totally irrelevant. But anyway, the Banky King sent Professor Francis Johnson, an Inspector General, to investigate this matter. Francis Johnson investigated the matter and concluded that Mr. Zakian had been maligned and that rather than being vilified, we should in fact have thanked him for doing what he did. Zakem was a wealthy man. He didn't need no Liberian government petty rent. So that's the first thing on this whole Zakem issue. The question of the Zakem contract. Part of the reason I got fired was because this contract, this procurement, was a 2-year-long procurement. It was not something we did overnight. It was very exhaustive. As I said, I hired a Canadian petroleum consulting firm that had been recommended to us by the World Bank. They had done some work for us when I was at the mansion as advisor to Judy Brown, a reputable firm. They were the ones who helped us to design the tender, evaluate the bids. I had them do a shadow evaluation because we had a bidding committee. I recused myself from the bidding committee. Mr. T. Nelson Williams, chairman of the bidding committee, evaluation committee. The committee, we had all the bids open in public. We did our due diligence. The bidding committee, the evaluation committee, made a recommendation to me as managing director as to who should be the bid should be awarded to. I will point out that the current contractor who was given the bid after I was fired, his bid was $10 million more than Zakem. In addition to that, their submission was sloppy. It was very unprofessional. And what a lot of people don't know is that the guy who represents the country happens to be my personal friend. When I go to Accra, I stay at his house. So I had every incentive to award the contract to his company, Motherwell. But I don't know whether because they took for granted my friendship with him, but their submission was sloppy. But more than that, when we came to open the bid, they informed us that their bank, the Royal Bank of Scotland, was about to go under, $34 billion loss, and that they would not be able, even if they won the contract, they would not be able to go through with it. So that takes care of it. The Japanese oil deal, that happened 2 years after I left LPRC, my friend, Mr. Gonglo. I wasn't even at LPRC when this Japanese oil deal. And that was, in fact, is this oil deal that led to Councillor Nibale Warner quitting from LPRC as chairman of the board, because he said there were some unsavory things. He pointed these out to the president. Nothing was done, so he quit. So you cannot lay blame for the Japanese oil deal to me. As I said, it happened 2 years after I left LPRC. The appointment of T. Nelson Williams. This was not a decision I made on my own. First of all, before he came on board, there was a deputy managing director, Alfred Harris. He decided to retire. And it was upon his retirement, I went to the board and I went to the president. And I said to her, I asked her, please do not let us go the normal route, go and make a political appointment, hire somebody who's just a party stalwart or some politician and allow us to go through the proper recruitment. Mr. Gonglo, you were wrong. This job was put in the newspapers. It was put on the internet. We had an exhaustive recruitment process in which the board was involved. My board was involved. They were involved in the evaluation. We hired a recruitment firm to do the initial recruitment, a firm called Jaffe, which is based in Liberia. They did the initial screening, and then they recommended to us a short list of candidates, on which there was T. Nelson, there were some local people, and there were some foreign. There was T. Nelson, somebody else, and there were 3 local candidates. We then interviewed the foreign candidates. We interviewed over the telephone. Not just me, but there was a board. There was a recruitment committee. I think there were 3 of us. Ms. Dr. Amelia Ward, who was chairman of the board, myself, and somebody else. We did the interviewing of the local candidates in person with foreign candidates over the phone. And when we got to the point where we decided to shortlist, I think, 2 candidates, I went to the United States and interviewed the 2 candidates that were shortlisted and selected T. Nelson Williams because he was the best qualified candidate. So T. Nelson didn't get his appointment. I didn't even know T. Nelson before. I knew his father, but I didn't even know him before I interviewed him. Okay? So now, the question of the restructuring at LPRC. When I arrived at LPRC, the country was close to being bankrupt. It had $2.3 million of debt. It had only $50,000 in this bank account. I remember that figure because about a week after I took over, we had to pay the January payroll. And the controller comes to me and he said, Chief, it's time to pay the payroll when we don't have enough money. I said, what do you mean we don't have enough money? It's an oxymoron. How can an oil company not have enough money? He says, Chief, the payroll is $90,000. We only have $50,000. Here's the bank statement. I said, okay, is it just because of me or if you had this problem before? He said, we have this problem all the time. I said, what do you normally do? He said, we go to one of the Lebanese, go to one of our importers, we borrow money and we pay high interest. I said, okay, we'll do this, but this is going to be the last time we'll ever borrow money from anybody to pay our employees. When I arrived at LPRC, so we had $50,000 in the bank, we had $7.5 million of accumulated losses, we had $2.3 million of debt that we owed to people in the community. It had reached a point where people didn't want to give us credit because we had a reputation as a company that didn't pay its debts. Okay? And we had 600 employees on the payroll. 600 employees at a time when all LPRC was doing was storing petroleum products. When LPRC was refining, when we had a whole refinery going, we had only 200 employees. But now that we were no longer refining, we had 600 employees, plus 100 of football and basketball. So we had a payroll of 700 people. Ernst & Young, who had done an evaluation of LPRC during the transitional government, when asked what they thought should be the optimum size, they said a company like LPRC should have no more than about 75 employees. The Guinean equivalent of LPRC, they have 4 terminals, and we have 1. There are 4 terminals. They have a total of 75 employees over 4 terminals. We had 1 terminal with 600 employees. So one of the first things I embarked upon, and then we had 6 layers of management: managing director, deputy managing director, director. Then we had managers, assistant managers, supervisors. We had an organization chart that was, and we had 16 departments for storing petroleum products. So I decided, with strong backing from my board, and for those who thought I was running the company by myself, in the first 5 months I was at LPRC, I had a robust board of directors. They met weekly for 5 months, every Friday. I asked the president and she agreed. I said, I don't want any politicians on my board. I only want seasoned business people and experienced social, civil society people. No ministers. And that's what I had on my board. My board included an American president of the oldest bank in Liberia, who was an ex-Marine and a former member of the White House Presidential Honor Guard. I had business people, seasoned business people on my board, people I could look up to and people give me guidance. And we embarked upon a radical reorganization, restructuring of the corporation. We took 3 layers of management out of the corporation. For a small corporation, do you need 3 deputy managing directors falling over each other? No. I flattened the organization so that the managers would have more say. We also embarked upon a very creative severance program that saw 400 people volunteer to leave the company. We reduced the workforce by 2/3 without firing a single person. We offered them, how do we do it? We offered them an ungodly amount of money. We made it attractive for them to leave. They volunteered, 400 people. It cost me $1.5 million. I got all of that money back within a year. That's cost savings. So, and by the time I left LPRC, on sales of 12 million, we were making 7 million profits before tax. That compared with my predecessor when I got there, LPRC annual profit before tax was 1.5 million. By the time I left, we were around 7 million. And when I left, the $50,000 that I met in the bank account had transformed to 10 million US dollars. The GAC, after I left, they couldn't believe it. I've never seen a public corporation with that kind of money in its bank account. They came and they verified that. And the value of the company, I estimated when I took over LPRC, the value of the company was about 5 million. When I left, I estimated the value was about 35 million. So I left behind a robust company with a very strong balance sheet, and it was a money machine for the government. During my tenure, LPRC, the first public corporation in the history of the Republic, we pay taxes on our profits just like a private company. I volunteered to do that. And we paid dividends to the government. In the 3 years I was there, we paid the government $7 million in taxes and dividends. And I still left $10 million in the bank. And again, you talk about 13 million missing. Well, you explain to me how that would be possible. We had sales of 12 million a year. We had, out of that, we had profit of about 7 million. So that means our expenses was 5 million. How can you not account for 13 million if your total expenses are only 5 million? That means to say you had no expenses, no employees. Again, this is a typical example of a misrepresentation of the facts. You come to my fuel allowance. When I arrived at LPRC, the managing director, as part of his compensation package, we had salary and we had benefits. As part of the compensation package of the managing director was 3,000 gallons of fuel a month. I thought that was excessive. And over the objection of my wife, I volunteered and reduced that by 2/3 from 3,000 gallons a month to 1,000. Why do you need that? Because we run generators, Mr. Gongolo, in Liberia because there's no electricity. That was what the fuel was for the generators, for the home of the managing director. And I was not the only person in the Republic of Liberia that gets a fuel allowance. It is very common. In the absence of electricity on the grid, that's how we generate electricity. You have to buy generators. Now, you've mentioned this excess that was lifted. You're absolutely right. And John Molu, when he went to Nigeria, that's what he discovered. I didn't know that. Why? Because the NNPC allocation year runs from October 1 to September 30th. ADAC had lifted as far, so after the 30th of September 2007, as far as I was concerned, the contract was closed. And I had no reason to know otherwise. ADAC lifted this quantity you're talking about after the end of the NNPC fiscal year. So in essence, it was outside our contract. When John Molu brought it to my attention, I immediately made representations to Audits. I said, our auditors have discovered that you lifted an additional million barrels of oil. Where is my money? And they paid it. And it was put in our bank. It's convenient that the Auditor General, who was in the business of trying to score points, he pointed out the missing, the excess lifting. He never pointed out that that was in fact made up, that they paid for. So I hope now the question of the incorporation of LPRC. LPRC is the only public corporation that was not established by an act of legislature. And there is history to that. So all that things you're talking about that they need to approve, there is nothing that says the legislature has to approve any contract. I don't know where you get that from, Mr. Bonglo, but the legislature does not approve contracts for public corporations. The only thing they approve are concessions. These are contracts between the government of Liberia and a concessionaire for raw material, for natural resources. A contract to do service on tanks does not constitute a concession. And there is no requirement under Liberian law for the legislature to, because if that was the case, the legislature would have its hand full. Do you know how many contracts are entered into by public corporations every year? Lots of them. There is no requirement. In fact, this is the misunderstanding people have. The fact that the Liberian government is a shareholder in a corporation does not make that corporation part of the government. An elementary 101 contract law course will tell you that corporations, that's the whole point of incorporation, corporations have a persona that is distinct from their shareholders. Those of you who have 401k plans, does Coca-Cola come back to you anytime they want money? Do they come back to you as a shareholder in a mutual fund and ask you for money? Of course not. Your liability is limited to the shares you bought in Coca-Cola. And that's it. That's the extent of your liability. But people in this country have this notion that a public corporation, that the government is liable. It is not. Right. Now, the last point about the incorporation of LPRC. Here is the history. LPRC, there was a predecessor company to LPRC called LRC, the Liberia Refining Company. It was a corporation set up by Sun Oil. They built the refinery in the late 60s. There was a point in time when there was a falling out between LRC and the government of Liberia. You remember the oil the oil crisis in the 70s, when the price of oil went up through the roof. LRC tried to ask the government to give them permission, I think it was a 5-cent increase in the price of petroleum. The government refused. So the Sun Oil executives, they left Liberia, and as soon as they hit American soil, they cried foul. And they said the government had expropriated them. And you know, back in those days, if the U.S. corporation accused an African or third world government of expropriation, the next thing that will follow that is the CIA and a coup d'etat. And Willie Talbot was smart enough to know that, and he said, "Okay, we will buy out Sun Oil." So the Liberian government formed a new corporation. It was not formed by the legislature. It was formed just like any private company. It was a joint stock company. They got articles of incorporation, and Mrs. Sirleaf, ironically, who was then, not Clifford Watterson, was Mrs. Sirleaf, who was then Deputy Minister for Revenue of the Ministry. She was the incorporator of LPRC. It was a joint stock company. It's the only public corporation that is a joint stock company that was not formed by an act of legislature. Again, I try to educate people in the legislature to that, because they wanted to believe and wanted to behave as though LPRC was formed by act of legislature and therefore it had to have a structure based on legislation. There was no legislation for the formation of LPRC. LPRC was formed in 1978 as a joint stock company, just like any other private company. The only difference is that the principal shareholder was the government of Liberia. That's all. Tomorrow, if the government of Liberia decided to sell its shares in LPRC, it would not require going back to the legislature for any act or anything. It would just be a matter of whoever the government designated to negotiate on its behalf to go and negotiate the sale. So I hope I have clarified some of the misrepresentations or lack of understanding of the issues of Mr. Gonglo.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Greaves. Actually, whoa, that was a long deliberation. Actually, there's a lot of my own questions that I had before me here, so that's always a good thing. Folks, a whole lot of you have joined us. Too many of you have joined us, and I'd like to welcome you to the Liberian Diaspora for a weekly talk show. Tonight, we have the privilege of hosting Mr. Harry Greaves, former Managing Director of Liberia Refinery Company, LPRC for short. We will continue taking our questions. We will now hear, I believe this is Mr. D. Flomo, the host of Destiny Debate, I believe. 9215, your name, where you calling from, and your question, comment, or concern, if you're not Mr. Flomo, that is.
Thank you, Kafumba. My name is D. Flomo, the Stockholm. Mr. Greaves, how are you, sir?
I'm fine.
I'm calling for the state of Minnesota, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show. But I just have a concern that has to do with whether you know Talo Kwangwa, the late Kwangwa's wife.
Yeah.
If you do, we hosted her sometime last year on Liberia Destiny Debaters, and she mentioned your name among a group of people, President Ellie Johnson Sirleaf, Harry Young, and you, along with other people that she said alleged that you guys were part of the group of people. You were part of the people that came for her husband and took him to Liberia that led to his death. Do you want to comment on that, sir?
Well, first of all, Thomas Kwangwa is a grown man, was a grown man. He was no child. Nobody took him anywhere. Wherever he went of his own volition. And actually, if you really want to be honest, they came to me. I didn't go to them. They were already in their camp in Sierra Leone doing their thing. So I didn't take, people need to take responsibility for their actions, good or bad, for their achievements and their mistakes. They need to stop trying to shift blame for their mistakes on other people. As I said, Thomas Kwangwa was a grown man. I didn't take him anywhere. When he decided to go to Sierra Leone, I didn't even know he was in Sierra Leone until I was called by his group from Sierra Leone. They were already there, in camp, training. I had nothing to do with it. Does that answer your question?
All right. Mr. Greaves, are you done?
Yeah, does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah. Well, Mr. Flomo, I clear you from the queue here. I hope you were done. If not, I think it was by quick error. So you can always come back, *61. You know how it works. So if that didn't answer the question, by all means, please dial *61 and come back to ask a follow-up question. Hold on here 1 second. Okay, so we'll take our next caller from Mr. Ducle in Winnipeg, Canada. Mr. Ducle, sorry for the long wait. I know you've been waiting in the queue forever, but welcome to the show. Your comment, question, or concern for Mr. Greaves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kurma, for giving me this opportunity. And I must say my thanks and appreciation to Mr. Greaves for giving us this opportunity to dialogue with him today on a very interesting topic. So I want to thank Mr. Greaves for this opportunity. I've got a comment and I've got some questions to follow. Mr. Greaves has elaborated on a lot of issues ranging from corruption, governance, etc. But it almost beat my imagination to listen to Mr. Greaves' assertion, when he talks about nepotism, corruption, etc. Mr. Greaves had just come across as very, very typical of either present or past Liberian politicians in recent time. I don't know any of the ministries or departments or agencies in Liberia that have been or that were audited by John Molu. I don't know anyone that was audited who had ever taken responsibility to what they were indicted in those audits. I found that troubling. And further to that, if Mr. Greaves can refresh his memory, there was a gentleman by the name of Patrick Sayon who wrote an article in 2009, I believe it must have been. And what Patrick Sayon did in that article was that he talks about politicians who were associated with Charles Taylor before and during the war. And Patrick Sayon make mention of something called Association of Constitutional Democracy in Liberia, of which Mr. Harry was a member, based on a claim made by Patrick Sayon. Patrick Sayon asserted in that particular article that Mr. Greaves was one of the active members of that organization that contributed the $10,000 to Charles Taylor war effort. And interestingly, Mr. Greaves did admit to the claim. Not only did he admit, he went further to say that the ACDL had two factions, two movements. One was covert and one was overt. And so he went on to say that the $10,000 effort that was given to Taylor for his war effort was part of the covert portion of the organization that contributed to. In other words, Mr. Greaves did admit that his involvement in that particular movement was a mistake, taking into account the consequences that follow, as we all know today. So to sit here and listen to Mr. Greaves, it sounds as if history is repeating itself, where Liberian politicians, policymakers who have been given a chance to deliver have all failed the Liberian people, and they continue to fail the Liberian people. I can go on and on because...
what is the question? What's the point? So what is the question?
For the interest of time, I would like to keep it short and sweet. So with what I've just mentioned, I was just sort of trying to give a background as to some of the things Mr. Reeves had been involved in the past, going on to the transition of Judy Bryan government. So my question to you is, with all of what that I've just mentioned, and I heard you respond to the previous question before me, you sounded very, very dismissive in that response, and make it sound as if to say, yes, Kafumba was an adult, he made a conscious decision as an adult. Far from it, and you know it. This was something that went bad, and now everybody is disassociated from it, including Madam President and other people. So how do you now, with all what we know of your past, association, etc., how do we now believe you to be as genuine as you want us to believe? Because when I hear you speak and you talk about governance and corruption, etc., I must point out to you that one of the mistakes, the flaw that we have as Liberian, we think, we wrongly assume that holding a master's degree qualifies you to do anything. And that's part of the problem. But I will leave that for another opportunity. So my point to you is, how do you address yourself to the current situation as it's involved when we know all these things that have happened in your past, and how even in your introductory you said you were asked to keep quiet and you did. That in itself sounds very suspect, the fact that you accepted to remain silent, because trust me, without you saying, we know the ramification that might have ensued had you not keep quiet. So I would like to hear you elaborate on some of these issues.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Thank you. Mr. Greaves?
Yeah, I don't know how relevant what this man is saying is. As far as the audit report is concerned, we responded in great detail to John Molu's audit reports. It's instructive to learn. He published his audit reports, but never published our response. So that would deal with your question. In great detail, and if you want copies of my response, I have copies. I've gotten your name. I can make them available to you. We responded to Molu's reports in great detail. That's the first point I want to make. As regards, I answer only for myself and my performance. I have just outlined to you my performance at LPRC. I took a company that was virtually bankrupt, had only $50,000 in its bank account, and within 3 years, I paid off all the debt. I more than quadrupled the annual profit, and I left $10 million in the bank. So that is my performance that I'm asking to assess. Not some, you talk about $10,000 in that. Do you know how much it costs to prosecute a war? Do you think $10,000 really made any difference to Charles Taylor's war effort? You know, so I'm not even going to address that. Let's get real here. Let's get real. You've asked for me. I'm not shifting blame. Somebody asked me, say, Mrs. Kuyankwa, say, I took her husband. And I responded to that question. I didn't take her husband anywhere. He took himself. And after he took himself, he came to me to ask me for help. I didn't take him to Sierra Leone. He took himself there. He and his associates took themselves there. I made no arrangements for him to go to Sierra Leone. I made no arrangements for his training of himself and his people. None of that. He did that on his own. He and his associates. They asked me at a certain point for help. That was the extent of my involvement with them. So I cannot take responsibility for a grown man and what he does. I take responsibility for myself and what I do. And I take responsibility for the results that I have, and I'm very proud of the results I had at LPRC. And I want you or anybody else to show me which other managing director of a state-owned enterprise can boast of the results that compare with the results I achieved in the 3 years I was managing director of LPRC. The figures are there for you to see. This is not magic. This is not supposition. This is not, we used to publish financial statements. When I was at LPRC, every quarter, I held what I call a meeting under the tree. You ask any LPRC employee who was there when I was there, then most of them are there, they will tell you about my meeting under the tree. Every 3 months, I used to bring a blackboard. I would show them an abbreviated income statement, how much income we earned, how much we have spent in the main categories, and how much profit we have made for the quarter and the year to date. And I also produced an abbreviated balance sheet in which I showed them how much money we had in the bank, what we had outstanding as receivables, if we had any debts, and what our profit was. That was no secret. I did that every 3 months when I was managing. I was not required to do it, but I felt it was my obligation as part of my belief in transparency. I felt it was my obligation to do that for my employees. And you can go and talk to any LPRC employee. Call them, ask them, about my meetings under the tree, and they will tell you about that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Greaves. Let's keep taking more calls. Folks, as many of you know, we have two shows today, tonight, should I say. We are winding down our first show with Mr. Harry Greaves, who's calling from million miles away in Liberia, actually. And then after him at 7 p.m. Central tonight, we will host Judge Melvin Johnson. Many of you already know the fiancé of Ellie Conqueror, and he's going to be speaking, interestingly, to the same issue of corruption with specifics to his recent audio release that implicates my Gibi County Senator. So he will be joining us momentarily after our first show tonight. So I do ask you to stay tuned so that we can enjoy both shows. Let's hear from our next caller. Senior, I'll get you next. After this next call, I'll get you next, Senior. Let's hear from 6655, 6655. Could you please tell us your name, where you're calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Greaves. This is Edwin Dennis from the city of Philadelphia.
How you doing?
Yeah, I want to thank you very much for the detailed explanation that you are providing this body. And for full disclosure, while you were managing director of LPRC and before you got there, my brother works for the LPRC. And before you got there, he was honored to believe that with all of my involvement in opposition politics, his job was at risk. I said, well, you have to be dependent on your own performance. So, be that as it may, he is still currently with LPRC. But my question to you, or the series of questions that I have, one is that in the book, The Child Will Be Great, Madam Salif indicated that you were the one who informed her about the November 12 operations and that she absolutely had nothing to do with it. And it is widely spread in Liberia that she was part of the November 12 operations. So I would like if you clarify that. That's my first question. And my second observation is that I like the fact that you are speaking out now. But you see, there has become a culture of our public officials that while they are in government, they seem not to know or perhaps involved in the culture of silence about the prevailing situations in our country respective to corruption, respective to mispractices, abuse of power. But the moment or time that they are out of whatever position they are holding, then all of a sudden they begin to see and understand the condition that the ordinary people face. So it was astonishing to me to hear you, knowing what I have known you to be in the Grand Coalition Action Party time, to hear you say that you were asked to keep quiet after your removal from office, and you indeed adhered to that. And now that you think it is timely to speak, I'm a little bit confused as to why that is happening. Now, my third question on the...
Can we just keep it at two? Let me
just deal with this because Honorable Greaves made an assertion relative to this on... Can I just take a quick question?
Okay,
let me just make it quick. The Justice Ministry report that investigated you and Mr. Aloysius Japa, who is a friend of mine, the report indicated that the President asked them to identify or to find out whether there was a felony in the transaction with you and Mr. Japa. And the response of the Justice Ministry in that report was that, yes, you had attempted to offer bribe, and they asked Japa if that money had been offered, would he have accepted it? And to the response of Mr. Japa, the Justice Ministry also concluded that there was an attempt to accept bribe. So indeed, their question to the President was that, yes, there was a felony that was involved. So I want you to clarify these three concerns of mine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's deal with the last one. The Justice Ministry investigation was not a serious attempt at getting to the bottom of this matter. It was a whitewash. Because if it was a serious attempt and there was a felony on my part, the Justice Ministry would have prosecuted me. They did not, for good reason, because they know that that was not a serious attempt at getting to the facts of this case. I offered the entire conversations I had with Japa was tape recorded, and it was put on the internet. It was on Front Page Africa for more than a year. So you could have listened to it and find out for yourself whether I did in fact make an offer. If you listen to that recording, there was no offer from me to Mr. Japa. The request came from him. It was an attempt at extortion. I did an affidavit, which was notarized, which I submitted to Councillor Henry Cooper, the chairman of the committee. Do you know what his response was? I didn't ask for an affidavit. My lawyer, my American lawyer, I informed him before I did the recording that I was going to do the recording because I suspected that Mr. Japa's meeting with me would be a shakedown. And that's exactly what it was. And we went to the meeting, and I informed the committee the day after this happened that Mr. Japa had attempted to shake me down. So this was not something I kept secret. I informed the committee, and the committee took no action. And that's when I decided to go to the press. Because my lawyer told me, he said, Harry, you have to go to the press now. You have to go to the press before they do, because if you don't go to the press and you try to respond to anything, it will give the impression that you were just trying to cover up. So I went to the press, and I was informed that that was the real reason I was fired. The real reason I was fired because I went to the press, and I told them about what had happened. So I hope that answers your question. There was another question on what? Yeah, what was the other question about? There was a Japa issue.
I'm trying to get a call.
Look, I was managing director of LPRC. My focus was on what was happening at LPRC, not on the whole government of the Republic of Liberia. That was not my focus. My commentary and the things I did were things that I felt I had control over, which was the management of this corporation, to make it profitable, to make it efficient. That was my responsibility. It was not my responsibility to be commenting on everything in the government, what is happening in the Ministry of Finance, what is happening at the Justice Ministry, the agenda. That was not my responsibility. I didn't make it my business to go making comments all over the place about every ministry and every minister what they're doing. That is not my responsibility. And I decided to make a comment on this particular issue because, as they say, my cup runneth over. I have watched things happen, and for me, this was the final straw. There's nothing in the world, there is no law that says that everybody in a country should comment about everything at every time. I was not in the central government. I remind you of that. I was in the central government during the transitional government period. I was not in the central government during the Sirleaf administration. I was managing director of a public corporation, and that was my responsibility. And that's what I tried to exercise to the best of my ability, to manage what I was entrusted with to the best of my ability. And my record speaks for itself. I'm not asking you to just take blindly what I say. Look at the facts. We publish financial statements. If you want copies, I have those financial statements on my computer till this day. I can send you copies of the financial statements of LPU and anybody else who wants them. I've got the financial statements for the last 6 months before I left, for the period, the 6 months ended June 30th, 2009. I'm looking at those financial statements right now. $6.7 million in sales, $4 million in profit, $2.5 million, $1.5 million more than we budgeted. If you are a financial person, that's a net margin of 60%. I can tell you, Jack Welch, when he was chairman of GE, would have given his hind legs for those kind of results. 60% profit margin. If you're in business in the United States, you go ask any businessman to tell you how many companies make those kind of margins. Not many.
Okay. I believe there was a third question which had to do with the association with April 12th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I came here to talk about corruption. I didn't come here to talk about November 12th. And I will make no comment. Yeah, I will make no comment on that.
Okay, no comment on that. Well accepted. We'll take a call from Mr. Senior Yewule from Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Mr. Yewule, welcome to the show.
Yes, Brother Kafumba, thank you so much for taking my call, and let me join others to say hello to Mr. Greaves, and thank you for being on our show. I have two parts question. One, when we send out the invitation about your appearance, we received calls and emails from some concerned people who I refer to them as the critics. Then I will ask my own question. The critics are wondering why now, even though our dynamic host, Mr. Kroma, asked the question previously, but to add a more substance to it, they are saying it is clear that Madam Sally is done. There's no if and but about it. She's out of the door. She's only there badly, but emotionally, leadership-wise, she's done. She's finished. So people like you, Dr. Sawyer, and others who been around Liberian politics stay around because you don't want to exit the stage. And because you realize Madam Sally is done, so you're trying to position yourself for the incoming who will be president. So I will allow you to comment on that. But here's my question to you. Do you have any regrets? This is an opportunity for you to speak openly to Liberian people. And as part of this program, we always have this recording, so you're on record right now as I ask you this question. Do you have any regrets for your involvement in the Liberian Civil War that killed over 200 more thousand of our people? Thank you for taking my call, Brother Akroma.
The last question, I'm not going to comment on that because you would have to ask that question of hundreds of thousands of Liberians. So I'm not going to comment on that. That's not what I came on this program for. For me to comment on that adequately, we would need to discuss the whole circumstances of the war. And that's not what I came here for. As far as you say, because Mrs. Salif,
Mr. Salif is done, and some of you are now speaking out in an effort to reposition yourself for.
My life is not driven by the designs and the careers of other people. I am my own person, and I decide for myself what I will do and when I will do it. Mrs. Salif's exit from the stage is irrelevant to my commentary on what is going on in Liberia. Whether she remains in office, she doesn't remain in office, that is irrelevant to my commentary. I'm commenting because I feel strongly and passionately about this issue, and there are many other issues that I feel strongly and passionately about. And I choose when to make comments based on my assessment of the situation, not other people's assessment. I'm sure you have your views about this government, previous government, and you will probably have views about subsequent governments. Are you going to get on a soapbox every day to express your views? I doubt it. You will pick the forum and you will pick the time when you will express your views. Me likewise. Nobody will dictate to me when I express opinion, how I express opinion, and in what forum I express an opinion. That is for me to decide. That is my right as a citizen to comment or not to comment. To comment or not to comment. That is my right as a free person in a democracy. I may choose certain times to comment about certain things. I may choose other times not to. I am under no obligation, moral or otherwise, to make a comment every day of the week about everything that goes on in the government, whether it is the Sirleaf government, the Judy Bryant government, or any subsequent government.
Okay. Mr. Greaves, do you have any political ambition for 2017? Can we expect to see you in the race for the presidency in 2017?
I have not made any decision. You know something? I'll tell you, Kafumba. When I helped to set up the Cocoyard Development Association 8 years ago in 2005, my colleagues in the transitional government, including the chairman, Mr. Bryan, they assumed that the reason why I was doing this was because I was trying to lay the groundwork for running for political office. I told them, no, that's not the reason. I was doing it because my family had a history of leadership in Cocoyard. So I was just, if you like, I was just continuing the family tradition. They didn't believe me. The elections came in 2005. They saw I wasn't running for the House. I wasn't running for the Senate. He said, okay, he's just postponing. He would do it he would do it when we have the next election. 2011 came. My people came to me from Cocoyard to ask me to run. I told them I had no intention or desire to run. And I didn't. Again, people assumed I would. So elections are coming around 2017, and people are asking this question. Kafumba, if I decide to run, you will be one of the first to know. But as of now, I don't have an intention. But it doesn't mean I may not.
Okay.
As I said, if I decide to do it, you will be one of the first. It's not going to be something I will keep secret.
Okay.
And if I decide to run, I will run on my record, not on anybody else's record, on my record. Whether I run for the Senate, for the House, or for the presidency, if I decide to run, it will be on my record.
Okay. Well said. I invited the host of Destiny Debater to see if he had a quick follow-up to the question you asked earlier. He left the queue quickly, or I cleared him out, so I believe this will be quick. Mr. D. Flomo, quickly here. What's the follow-up?
Yes, thank you again, Kafuma. I think my question is almost like what Senya was trying to say to the Honorable Man, Mr. Greaves. Mr. Greaves, this is D. Float again from Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. My question to you is, I know that I have heard from people, and some of them serve as a guest on Liberia Destiny Debaters, and one of them mentioned how you are very close to Madam Sirleaf, and now that you are speaking against corruption and the whole Naya, why is it that, again, you are coming out to speak against those, a person that many of you supported in the past, and now you people are coming out to say, hey, this is not right. Why?
Let me just tell you something. You don't know me. But for those people who know me, people who know me know I am a very straightforward person. What you see is what you get. When I feel passionately about something, I express myself irrespective of who is on the other side of the divide, of the argument. Nobody intimidates me. I have not yet met the president who intimidates me. I have not yet met the job that is so compelling that it will induce me to do what I believe to be wrong. The legislature tried to browbeat me into canceling a contract. I felt it was wrong. The contract was valid, and canceling it carried with it the risk that the other side would sue us for breach of contract, which is in fact what has happened. Zakem has gone to court against the government for breach of contract. The matter hasn't been settled, but if it's settled in their favor, the government will risk paying a lot of money. I could have very easily have played the game and gone along with people in the legislature and done what they told me to do. I felt it was wrong, and I told them point blank, I will not do that. I will not do what I think is wrong. I don't care who's on the other side. That's the kind of person I am. When I feel strongly about something, I take a position, and I don't care who is on the other side. Emperor, president, king, I don't care. And none of them can intimidate me. Those people who know me know that. I don't scare easily. When the legislature decided that they're going to hold me in contempt, and I got wind of it, I went to the Supreme Court, and I got an injunction, and I put it in my hip pocket. So somebody told me, we're going to call you to the legislature, and they will ask you to do something which they know you will not do. And they will pick dry fuss with you, and then they will try and put you in jail for contempt. So I went to with that knowledge, my lawyer and I, we went to Supreme Court, and we got an injunction from the Justice in Chamber. I put the injunction in my hip pocket. I went to the legislature. They asked me, have you canceled the contract? I said no. Will you cancel the contract? I said no. Oh, you're defying the legislature. And I told them the reasons why. I wanted to explain to them, no. We don't want any explanation. We don't want any PowerPoint. I said, well, I will not do that. Then they tried to put contempt charge on me. I whipped out my injunction and slammed it on the table, at which point they got confused. So they didn't expect that. And then they reported me to the president. And I told the president, I said, Madam President, I told you before what I was going to do. I will not allow these people to put me in jail. So if you want me to withdraw my injunction, I will do so. But I want a clear understanding. If they attempt to put me in jail after I withdraw my injunction, I will reintroduce my injunction. And so that's how that matter was settled. Mary Brewer, when she was faced similar things, I advised her to go to her lawyer and get an injunction. She did precisely that. And just recently, in January, the Supreme Court of Liberia found in her favor. You see, the point here is this. A lot of people in the legislature do not understand what contempt is. Contempt is when you seek to impede the legislature from doing its work. They summon you to a hearing. You refuse to show up. That is contempt. But you show up and you disagree with them, that is not contempt. Disagreeing with the legislature, it is not contempt. And that was what they were trying to hold me to. They were asking me to do something which was illegal and would put the government of Liberia at financial risk. I refused to do so. And I said it to their face. I will not do that. But what you're asking me to do, I feel is wrong. I will not do that for you or anybody.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Greaves. Folks, we are at the 2 hours mark, and let's see if we can squeeze in the rest of these calls within another 30 minutes or so, because I know it's getting late and later in Liberia. So let's see if we can squeeze the rest of you in 30 minutes now. To those of you who have may re-enter to ask follow-up questions, trust me, we will get to you if time permits. But for now, we'll keep taking new callers so they too can have a say. With respect to the text messages I've been receiving regarding our last show with President Tillman Collins of Grand Juda County Association, who appeared the very last time on this show. That show is now on YouTube. It was uploaded 4 days ago. If you wish to listen to a repeat broadcast, the place to look will be on YouTube. As usual, you can go there and type in Liberian Diaspora Forum, and you should be able to find it. And this one will also be uploaded in probably 2 or 3 days after today when I have time to do so. Until then, until it is uploaded, no, never mind, we'll have another show right after this, so the repeat number will not be necessary because the last show is the one that stays in the queue. But let me welcome those of you who just joined us. Let me welcome you to the Liberian Diaspora Forum weekly talk show, and also encourage you to stay with us even after this fresh show, because we have Judge Melvin Johnson coming out later tonight to speak to the same issues of corruption. As many of you know, Melvin Johnson been on here before, and I think he was on Destiny Debater yesterday. So it's the same fight against corruption. So I encourage you to stay tuned when he comes on later. Let's hear from 5756. I think it's one Emmanuel. I'm not sure. 5756. Your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves. 5756.
Emmanuel Beatty from the state of North Carolina.
Okay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank Mr. Greaves for appearing on this forum. And we're also happy that he was able to come out and clear the air, so to speak, in some respect. But there are one or two concerns. One, where Mr. Greaves can clearly, I know he expounded on this a lot, as far as he coming out right now to speak out against some of the irregularities in the government. However, and it's almost impossible, if I may say, where you can draw that distinction between, he's serving at the highest level and being very close to the power that be, and chose to not speak at the time, which of course is up to him, but it's kind of hard to decipher, one from the other, whereas you being an advocate for justice in Liberia, you being an advocate for good governance in Liberia, and things were happening and you choose not to speak, but at a certain time, probably when you're not part of that government. But that's something you have already dealt with. We just want to throw it out there. And then you made mention about, the organizational structure and all of that has to do with LPRC coming into being and the rest of it, to the point where the Liberian government serves as sort of an investor in the entity. Having said that, my question to you is, if the Liberian government is sort of a shareholder in LPRC, even though politically we know the government appoints the managing director, the government appoints the board and whatnot, what is the government's percentage in the LPRC, and who are the other shareholders in the LPRC? That's one. And
can we do one? We're running short of time.
Okay.
With you.
Who does the LPRC report to? If it is not reporting to the legislature, and the managing director and the board is being appointed by the president, who does it really report to?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I can answer that very simply. The legislature has no role directly, governance role in a corporation. The managing director is appointed by the president. The managing director reports to a board of directors, and the board of directors reports to the president. Okay? Now, I happen to believe that part of the problem we have with public corporations and poor performance is because the governance. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. We are here. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We're listening to you.
I believe that there are serious shortcomings in the governance arrangements we have for public corporations. And when the government, back in 2007, hired a consultant to look into this matter, I expressed my view back then. Of course, none of the things I recommended have been acted upon. But I believe if public corporations are going to perform, first of all, the president has no business appointing the managing director of any public corporation. Why? Because she is too far, he or she is too far removed from the day-to-day running of the corporation to be able to exercise any proper oversight. If you look at corporations, whether it's IBM, whether it's Coca-Cola, the shareholders, when they meet once a year, they don't appoint the president or CEO of the corporation. Their job is restricted to appointing the board of directors. It is the board of directors that should appoint the senior management. Why? That way, the senior management is accountable to the board. But what we have done in Liberia, we have put the boards of public corporations in a very difficult situation. They do not have the power to hire and fire the managing director. And that is an important governance tool of any board of directors. If they have the right to hire and fire, the managing directors know they are accountable to their board. But right now, they're not. All the managing director has to do is to keep the president happy. And that managing director gets away with murder. They don't have to even pay attention to their board. So if I had my brother, if I were president of Liberia, that's one of the first things I would change. I would not have the president appointing managing directors of public corporations. I will restrict the president's appointment powers to the board. And the board would have the power to hire and fire the managing director. That is what happens in corporations, in real corporations, in real life. And I am saying this with 40 years of experience, senior management experience, in the United States, in Britain, and in Liberia. That's what should happen. And if we did that, that's the first thing. The second thing is managing directors and the board should not just sit at the pleasure of the president to be hired and fired at his or her whim. They should have fixed terms of office. And there should be very clear guidelines as to the circumstances under which they can be removed from office. Because in the absence of that, you make it difficult for the board to operate because they work with a Damocles sword hanging over their head, that at any time they can be dismissed by the president. That shouldn't happen. They should only be dismissed for cause, because they misbehave. They're not doing their job. Not because the president just gets up one morning and decides that he or she wants to appoint their friend to that board. That isn't what should happen. Again, in real life, if you look at any corporation, the top management, they operate under contract. They have a contract to serve for a specific period of time. With our central bank, Elias Salibi, when he was governor, he made sure of that. The governor of the central bank cannot be dismissed by the president of Liberia on a whim. The governor of the central bank serves for a fixed term of office. The board of directors of the central bank, they sit for a fixed term of office. That is the only public autonomous agency that I know that has those protections. And those same protections should be extended to all public corporations. The managing directors should not be in a situation where they can just be fired at will, without cause. Likewise, the board of directors. They should not be in a situation where they can be replaced or removed from office at will, without cause. And they should appoint the managing director. I repeat, they, not the president, should appoint the managing director. And I have made my views very clear. But clearly, you can see that my views have not been taken into consideration because the public corporations, their heads, continue to be appointed by the president, and likewise the board, and they sit at the pleasure of the president. And to me, that is wrong, and I have expressed my views on that.
If you feel so strongly about your view of public cooperation, managing directors not being appointed by president, why did you turn down your appointment by Madam President?
Well, let me tell you something. You have two options in certain situations. You can get into a situation and try and improve it, or you can stand back and look and just criticize. I saw that LPRC provided a great opportunity for me to showcase my management skills and to turn around a corporation that was almost bankrupt and make it very profitable. That was my primary consideration, and that's exactly what I do.
Okay. So you took it basically when it could benefit you. Now that you benefited, you showcase your skills. So it's okay now for the president to not appoint. Well, let's that's just a side note. There are more. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm making a slide. I need to answer you. It didn't benefit me like how? It only benefited me.
Benefited you in the sense you just said you took it. Well, you thought it was an opportunity for you to showcase your management skill, which according to you did very well. You took a almost bankrupt entity and turned it into a more profitable one. So it did allow you to showcase your management skills. So then it was convenience, right? It was at least a show. What's that?
It benefited the government of Liberia. It benefited not just me, but the government of Liberia. While I was there, we paid the government of Liberia $7 million in taxes and dividends.
Okay. All right, we got more important questions coming from the audience here, Mr. Greaves. Thank you. I'll take that from my end. This should be an interesting call here. This is from our next caller will be from Harriet Greaves to Mr. Harry Greaves. Harriet Greaves to Mr. Harriet Greaves. Welcome to the show. Your question, comment, or concern. Please tell us where you're calling from too, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Kafumba. I'm calling from Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, welcome to the show.
Hi, Harry. Hi, everybody.
How are you doing?
Fine. I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Greaves. I've listened to all the questions, and I just want to say thank you for the responsible and professional manner in which he responded to the questions that were put before him. He was detailed. He was factual. But most of all, he debunked tonight most of the misrepresentations that we as family members living in America have been listening to for years. I do not have a question for Mr. Greaves, but I wanted to say something that people ask, why now? Why Mr. Greaves is speaking up now? Mr. Greaves is speaking up now because he respected his family and he listened. He did not stay out of politics because he was waiting for an opportune time. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for your contribution, and sorry for the long wait. I noticed you've been waiting here for a long time tonight, so we got too many callers waiting to talk to your brother. So, Mr. Greaves, let's take another caller. Let's hear from 0939. Let's see what this caller thinks. 0939, your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves.
Yes, this is Quite Doma calling from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Mr. Greaves, I have a comment. I don't have a question. Mr. Greaves, when they asked you about the Kafumba issue, you sounded like, hey, he was an adult. I didn't carry him there, he carried him there, and he got killed. There are some of us who believe that no one man can take a war to a whole country. No one man can fight a war, can wage a war in a whole country. Only people who support certain people are going to agree that Charles Taylor alone took war to Liberia, Kafumba alone took war to Liberia. People who knew Kafumba at the time of November 12th knew he didn't have contact with foreign leaders. Yes, he was an adult, Mr. Greaves. Adults discuss issues, and then they come to agreement. You guys who were the experienced politicians had discussion with him, and you convinced him. You didn't carry him like he was a baby. When the woman who was in charge of that project, when he approached Sierra Leonean president, when they said $1 million was needed, she said, even if you say $10 million, I only want the fools in Liberia to come down. You know why Mr. Robert Philip was killed in Liberia at his house? That woman and Mr. Philip went that morning to meet General Kafumba and his men at an old construction site in Cape Man. People that were arrested by the government, that's the statement they gave the government. That is the reason why some people were arrested in Liberia and placed into jail. But people who throw stones in Liberia and hide their hands are the ones who cause the trouble in Liberia. And when people continue
to hide and throw stones, things with chakla. And all of us will just go through what we went through from 1989 up to 2003. He was not a child, but adult, experienced politicians convinced him and carried him there. And he thought he was dealing with good people.
Wait. I cannot let those comments go unanswered. This man is making.
Mr. Greaves, hold on a second here. So, are you done, sir? There's no question, right?
Yeah, I thought you stopped me. I was talking.
No, I was just telling you to wrap it up because you've said that you're kind of repeating yourself now. So, if you have any question, you want to shoot down real quick?
No, I'm okay. I said I didn't have question. I wanted to make a comment.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Mr. Greaves, go ahead. Yeah.
I cannot allow that comment to go unanswered. First of all, he was not with Kafumba. He was not in Sierra Leone. He was not in Liberia. There is no way in the world that he knows who Kafumba was dealing with and who Kafumba was not dealing with. And for you to make the presumption that Kafumba didn't have contact with U.S. people, that is a monumental fallacy. That is a monumental fallacy. Kafumba was commanding general of the Liberian army before this incident happened. He was in constant contact with people at the senior levels of the U.S. military and its mission in Liberia. People I didn't know, didn't have any interaction with. So for you to say that Kafumba was teleguided by politicians is absolute nonsense. Kafumba did have connections. I didn't say he, on his own, brought war to Liberia. That's not what I said. I was merely responding to the allegation that I was told his wife made that I was the one who took him to Sierra Leone and took him to Liberia to get killed, which is absolute nonsense. When Kafumba and it was not him alone, he and his group decided to mount this operation, I was nowhere around. I was not consulted. It was only after they saw they were having difficulties that they contacted some of us. We were nowhere around when they were planning their operation. Nowhere. We were not asked for advice, counsel, or money. How he got to Sierra Leone, I do not know. How he got involved with the Sierra Leonean government, I do not know. But he got involved with the Sierra Leone government at the highest level. I was nowhere around when those arrangements were being made. Those negotiations were being made. The money to train their people, I was nowhere around when those monies were being made available. The camps where they were embarked, to this day, I have never been to the camps. I do not even know where the camps are. So it is a disservice to me and other people, for people who don't have the facts, to come on this program and make assertions that are clearly unsupported by informed opinion. That opinion is not informed, it's uninformed. It's a supposition that may have no basis in fact. You know, one of the great things about democracy gives you the right to talk sense. It also gives you the right to talk nonsense, to talk about things that you know nothing about, to express opinions based on misconception, misinformation, and prejudices. This caller has decided that I knew everything about the Kafumba operation before it started. And therefore, I was the one, me and other people, who introduced Thomas Kafumba to the people who he met and who planned with him. No such thing happened, my friend. No such thing happened.
Okay. Let's leave it there.
I take responsibility for the things that I did. I will not and cannot take responsibility for the things other people did, especially adults. I refuse to take responsibility for the actions and behavior of other adults. I will take responsibility for my behavior, my actions.
Okay. Thank you. 8972, 8972. Your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves. Hello, 8972, are you there? Any noise? 72? Okay. That caller got tired waiting. We'll take him out of the queue. That brings us to 7332. 7332, New York caller. Tell us your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves.
This is Jabate calling from New York. And Mr. Greaves, I would like to bring your attention to a forum that was held in New York, attended by Judy Bryan, the Investment Commissioner of Liberia, Mr. Talbot, Ambassador Andrew Young, President Salif, Councillor Richard Henry, ULA President Maurice Kofa, and some other Liberians, plus myself. You were at that time working at this with the central government, and Salif accused you and Brian of massive corruption, and she said this: you are going to pay for what you have done to the Liberian people, and I bet my life on this. You are going to pay for it. And you guys went back at each other for a while on stage. My question is, what did you do for her to change her mind about you and turn around and make you managing director of LPRC? And do you know of any specific instance for that of corruption in Liberia? That everybody talking about corruption, nobody has yet come to say this specifically is the instance of corruption. Can you? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, this conversation that you purport us to have, I have no recollection of it. And I will tell you for a fact that if you ask Mrs. Salif whether I am a corrupt person or have ever been, she will tell you no, because she had been asked this question many times. In fact, people assumed, as I said earlier, that the reason she fired me for LPRC was because of some corrupt practice of mine. She has been emphatic in stating that the reason she fired me had nothing to do with corruption. So I do not recall this conversation that you are now alluding to. I do not recall that. And had she thought I was corrupt, there is no way in the world she would have appointed me as managing director of LPRC. So let me just address that. Now, the last thing you said, have I pointed out? I don't know if you were on the call early on, but the reason I was even invited to this was because of the specific issue of the LTA lease, which I wrote an op-ed piece on. That was on Front Page Africa, the web version, and also in the newspapers in Liberia. So that was a very specific instance that I outlined. I also mentioned the lawsuit, the two lawsuits that we have now going through the courts in Kokoya, where I come from. Those are very specific instances of corruption, some of them even involving people I consider to be my friends. So that's the answer to your question. Is that exhaustive? Absolutely not. There are probably many other instances of corruption going on that I do not know about and that I have not been privy to. I don't claim to be privy to everything that goes in the government, even though a lot of people think that every decision that's made by Mrs. Early, she consults me. That could not be further from the truth. That is not the case. I don't make it my business, even as LPRC. I didn't make it my business to get involved in central government matters. I restricted myself to LPRC matters or matters that affected the business community that was part of my brief when I was chairman of the tax committee at the Chamber of Commerce. But I didn't get involved in things that were not my business for a very good reason. People get very, very, I would say, turf conscious. And I made it my business not to put my nose into the business of other ministers and ministries, because they become very, very protective and very, and paranoid. So I made it my business not to put my nose in places where I don't think they belong. Did I have a view on things? Yes, I have a view, but I don't make it my business to go preaching to the world on every minute of every second on what my view is on this issue or that issue. I choose the issues on which I will comment. I choose my issues carefully. I also choose the time that I will make comment. As I said before, nobody is under any obligation to get up on a soapbox every day of the week and make commentary on what is going on in the government. Nobody, me included, is under any obligation to do that. I will comment on issues as and when I choose. I will not be browbeaten or forced by anybody to comment on anything at any particular time. In the same way, I would not want to do the same thing to you or anybody else. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep, thank you. Now, let's take for a quick... Folks, now, in the interest of time, maybe I should announce this now rather than catching you in the middle of your discussion. In the interest of time, I would ask that you please limit your questions to one now, at the most, one or two or so that we can get the thing to a conclusion here. I know Mr. Greaves has been very generous with his time, and I'm grateful.
Yeah,
so we got to be right. I know right. It's 11, so we got to be respectful of that. That's how we are able to get them to come back. So let's keep the questions brief so that we can get out of here in the next few minutes or so. Let's take caller 4528 4528. Your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves.
Yeah, my name is Tala Kuiwangba, to be precise, Tala Muna Kuiwangba. How you doing?
Doing all right, man.
I'd like to say hello to the listening audience. I also would like to commend Mr. Harry Greaves for coming on to at least shed light on some of the events that took shape in our country for which Mr. Greaves knows about. I will make my question very brief because I came on very late. I was at a meeting. But my question for Mr. Greaves is that in 2005, I wrote a letter, an open letter to Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, including others, and Mr. Greaves was also part of that list of individuals who I wrote the letter to inquire what went wrong. So my question that I'd like to ask Mr. Harry Greaves is that in this public domain, Mr. Greaves, I understand you made some reference to the issue of the late General Kafumba. And according to Mr. Harry Yuan, and you know this very well, and I know this, you were part of the group, including Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Harry Yuan. But my family, I have a list of you all. And Harry Yuan can attest to that because he brought the names when Harry Yuan and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf came to visit us in Baltimore. What I'd like you to please tell our listening audience, Mr. Greaves, with all due respect, is to let them know what went wrong. Because it was you and all the names that I have who solicited funds to have that wall that took place in the coup in 1985. So can you try to at least bring, because we need to move on in our country. And the notion that we will keep hiding ourselves, those who were mainly involved in the conflict, to be in the closet and keep denying the fact when you know, I know, Harry Yuan knows, and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf knows, and Burma family, and Joan Funister, and Tonia King, the list goes on. Can you please shed light on what went wrong and what was your role, Mr. Harry Greaves, in terms of deciding for national aspects? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
One day I will write a book on my life. And in that book, I will go into excruciating detail about events in my life. But let me first debunk certain assumptions contained in your question. As far as the November 12 operation is concerned, I did not solicit or was involved in soliciting one dime. There were different people who performed different roles. And I can tell you, I was not involved in soliciting one dime of money for that operation. And Harry Yuan will testify to that. As to what went wrong, I would need another hour or two to tell you what I believe are the reasons for what went wrong. But this is not the forum. And it's not something I can do in 5 minutes. But I would be more than willing to sit down with you at any time of your choosing and tell you from my perspective, and my perspective is not the only perspective. I can tell you there are lots of different people with different perspectives on this whole thing. But from my perspective, I can tell you what I believe went wrong. But this is not the forum, and this is not the time.
Okay, all right. So, folks, I'm not taking any more new callers. I'm not taking any more new callers. Now, the few of you who've been sitting here with follow-up questions, comments, or concern, I will run through this list quickly, and then we'll call it a night. As I said, Mr. Greaves has been overly generous with his time, and so we cannot abuse that. So, Mr. Gonglo, I know you've been here forever, and I'll make you the last. I'll give you the last say here, the last say of the follow-up callers, and then we can wrap this thing up. Let's begin with 6655, 6655. Your quick follow-up question, comment, or concern. 6655.
Hello?
Hello? You on?
Yeah, okay. Actually, I wanted, my follow-up was apparently Mr. Greaves did not get clearly what my question was. I said, Madam Sirleaf, in her book, The Child Will Be Great, said that the only information when it came to her attention about November 12th was when Mr. Harry Greaves went over to her house to let her know what was happening in town. So the public believe, and from these discussions, is that Madam Sirleaf was part of November 12th. And in her book, she said she came to know about November 12th when Harry Greaves went to her house to let her know what happened, when it was already happening in the morning of November 12th. So I want a clarification from Honorable Greaves whether that assertion in The Child Will Be Great is true.
Thank you. Mr. Greaves?
I can answer that very simply. As I said to Tyler, I will write a book on my life, and I will address that specific issue in the book. That's all I will say at this point in time.
Okay.
So I'm afraid you're going to have to wait until the book comes out.
Okay. All right. D-Flo, quickly, your follow-up question, comment, or concern. D-Flo.
Yes, Mr. Greaves, I would like to say that this is D-Flo again from Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. We have hosted a lot of politicians, and I would like to say to you, if you are not a politician, I would ask you to become one, because you are very generous in the way you talk to, you interact with your audience in the diaspora. And I cannot wait to see you out there campaigning for somebody or for yourself. Thank you.
Okay, I will tell you, I was intimately involved in the 2005 campaign. I have promised myself that I will never get involved again in campaigning for somebody unless I am pretty sure that they will do what they tell me they will do.
Okay, all right.
In the 2011 campaign, you may have noticed I was missing in action. And that was not a mistake. I was not involved in any shape or form in the 2011 campaign. And there's a reason for that. I was intimately involved in the 2005 campaign. But I was not anywhere to be seen in the 2011 campaign. And I'll just leave it at that. And I'll leave you to conjecture as to why there was a difference.
Okay. All right. Senior Yeule, your final thought, comment, concern, or question? Final ones.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Kafumba. Yes, first let me say for the record, I was truly taken aback on the response that Mr. Greaves gave concerning his involvement in the war, whether he has any regrets. And I thought I didn't know what a history would be kind to him when the history of Liberia is rewritten, because Mr. Greaves is on record for being one of those people responsible for the bloody civil war in Liberia. And for him to say on this forum that he has no regrets, and he said, I will just pass on, that all I can say for that, it just tells you the level of politicking we have in Liberia. And it's unfortunate. But that's besides the point. Mr. Greaves said something that I wanted to piggyback on, but I missed it. Let me use the opportunity to do that now. He said, he told the president he was going to choose his own board member, or in essence, he formed his own board at the time he was general manager at LPRC. And what came to mind was, is it how it's done in Liberia that the managing director can tell the president that I will choose my own board, I don't want politicians on my board? It just tells you the level of influence Mr. Greaves had in this Ellen Johnson government. But today, the same Mr. Greaves is coming now to tell us what is going wrong in Liberia. And on the question of Kafumba, I didn't know whether he waiting for 2 years to come after the book is published and written. And when Mr. Kafumba asked him to set the record straight, he said, I will tell you later on, I need to meet with you. So it just tells you how far we have yet to come as a country. But, again, I hope history will be kind to him. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Yeule. And I don't know, before Mr. Greaves come on, with respect to Tyler's question, I have to say sadly that I agree with Mr. Greaves' position that the question of what went wrong November 12th, certainly that would take way more than 5, 10 an hour to explain. The question was too general. So I think the way he put that, no offense to Tyler Kafumba, but I agree that he cannot explain that in a few hours, in a few minutes, let alone a few hours, let alone a few minutes. Mr. Greaves, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and your characterization of me as being one of the ones responsible for the war, that is your characterization. I could not disagree with you more. That, Charles Taylor came here with an army. I don't recall me being anywhere in any position in that army. So I was in Washington, D.C., working at the World Bank, and then you say I was one of the ones responsible for the war? I heard about the war after the first shots were fired. I knew nothing about it before the war was launched. Charles Taylor was nobody's puppet. Charles Taylor assembled his people. He took them to Libya, got them trained, got them financed, and I was nowhere in the picture when all of that was happening. So to characterize me as being responsible for the war is arrant nonsense. It's arrant nonsense. And as regards my answering questions, I've answered questions to the best of my ability. I will not be pressured by him or anybody else to answer questions in a particular way that they want. I will answer questions now and forever the best of my ability. But no, I'm not going to allow anybody to put words into my mouth. If he wants to put words into my mouth, that's his business. I am not going to oblige.
All right, Mr. Greaves, good news is we're taking less than 5 calls here. I think that's about. Obviously, I can't even get these people to start, but that's fine. We'll just take 5 random calls here, including these follow-up callers that have been here forever, and then we'll call it at night. So this is always the case when we have certain guest questions don't stop coming. 8972, we tried you earlier. You didn't answer. That's why I cleared you from the line. So it wasn't intentional. I thought you had left the line. So your name, where you calling from, and your question for Mr. Greaves, quickly.
All right. Yeah, quickly. This is Copy Charlie again. Thank you very much, Mr. Greaves, for coming on the program. I've not been a fan of Mr. Greaves, so I just want to be clear for the beginning. But I also wanted to say first, before I ask my question, that I thought that when Mr. Greaves served as the managing director of the LPRC, he did have some public conversation with people about what the LPRC was doing. I remember he came to the United States in Pennsylvania, where he had a town hall forum in Pennsylvania. I was there at that program. He presented his financial report. I thought it was a good thing, even though I may have some disagreement, but I thought most Liberians managers in the public sector were doing such a thing, it would be good. So on that note, I commend him for that work. But here's my question to you, Mr. Greaves. People raise the issue and say that, look, you're just speaking out now. It's just going to be for a short while because you want to renew your relationship with the president. Has been a pattern in Liberia where people who follow the president, they come up publicly criticize her, and then once you call them back, they abandon their advocacy. So, people may say you're just speaking out now because you have a damaged relationship with her. You're not continuing in your advocacy. You don't believe in what you say. So I wanted to know how you respond to that. And then finally, my final question to you will be that you talked about Mr. Kafumba, that he should take up personal responsibility for what he did in terms of he's a grown man. He took his own decision and went to Liberia. I'm still interested to know from you. You did play a role, whatever role you play in the carnage that unleashed on our country. Could you, for your own self, take up some personal responsibility to say what happened was good or whether you were sorry for what happened to our country? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The last question I'm not going to respond to, as I say, because I don't want to give any glib answer. It would take a very long time to sit and analyze what happened and what went wrong, what went right. So I'm not going to answer that with some glib answer. As far as the other question is, I'm trying to ingratiate myself with the president. I have been out of government for 4 years. Had I wanted a job in this administration, I could have gotten it. I didn't want a job in this government. I don't want one now, didn't want one before, don't want one in the future. Again, in the 42 years that I've been in the workplace, I have worked in government only 2 out of the 42 years. So I am not your typical government functionary. I went to LPRC to do a job. I did the job, I didn't complete the job, but that's the only thing I was interested in. I have absolutely no interest in any job in this administration, none whatsoever. And I have made that absolutely clear to Mr. Sirleaf and anybody else in the government. I repeat, I have absolutely no interest in any job in this government. So again, people make comments and statements based on supposition. This man is now purporting to be God and to be in my head and to know what my motivation is. I will tell you, sir, I have absolutely no interest in a job in this administration. If asked, I would refuse. If appointed, I would not serve. I hope that clarifies my position. I have absolutely, I'm in the private sector, which is where I like to be. I am not the government functioning type. And I am doing okay where I am. I do not need a government job, never have. Again, I repeat, I have been in the workplace for 42 years, and only 2 of those 42 years I ever served in the Liberian government. I have worked for anywhere from mom and pop businesses. I've worked at the World Bank, and I have worked for some marquee companies in the United States. I was in the newspaper publishing business in the United States for 10 years. I worked at the Washington Post. I worked for a small newspaper group in the Midwest, and I was vice president of finance of the Dallas Morning News, what was then the 8th largest newspaper in the United States, the largest by circulation, the largest in the United States by advertising volume. I was one of 12 people who ran this company. I was the only black face around the executive boardroom table. I do not need a job from the Liberian government to survive.
Thank you. 5741, very quickly, one question. 5741.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kafumba. This is Country Boy here. I just want to ask Mr. Breeze one simple question. Mr. Breeze has been mentioned in the data work in our country since 1990 and up to now. And Mr. Breeze has been promising, like his team have been doing back in the days, promising our people with empty hand. So my question to you is just a yes or no question. Will you directly or indirectly involved with this war? And will you directly or indirectly involved with Mr. Kafumba murder? Those are the two questions I got. And number 3 is...
You say you got 2 questions, then you say number 3. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Greaves?
I will not answer any of those questions that are irrelevant, and they are ill-formed. I will not answer any of them.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Ms. Harriet Greaves again. For your final thought, comment, concern, or question. Oh, I never had a question the first time. Your final thought, Greaves. Harriet Greaves.
Thank you, Kafumba. I have a final thought. When I got the email from my brother with reference to this forum, it stated that he was going to be discussing corruption in Liberia. I find tonight that a lot of people hijacked your forum with issues about the Kafumba situation and whatnot. I think if people want to go into details on what happened at that period in time in Liberia, maybe we can petition you to set up a forum for 8 hours or 10 hours, and then we all can get on and ask our questions. But instead of using a very educated and beneficial forum to come and discuss how people personally feel, I'm offended, and my brother is trying to be very professional, but people trying to hijack this. This is my first time coming on any forum held by any organization in America. I chose not to, but he invited me. So I'm just saying to you that the naysayers, if they have something to say, maybe we all can petition you to set up a forum, and then, like he said, at a later date, we can go into details. But I think we Liberians in the diaspora, we need to know about the corruption and what can be done about it. I think we need to put to bed how we feel, what we think about what happened in the first war, the second war, the coup, or what Mr. Kafumba thinks. No disrespect. People have their personal opinions. I have mine, you have yours. But I do not think this was the appropriate forum for it. And we need to respect you and respect that.
Well, I have alluded to that. I have said that we do not have time to discuss that. But the thing is, I'm glad that you came here and you said this is your first time. But we've been doing this for the last couple of years now, and there's never been one show, not a single one, where we've brought a guest and put a topic down and restrict the audience to that. Dr. Sawyer came here to talk about good governance. He was questioning about his involvement in Black Bear, interim government, and the whole 9 years. That's just the nature of Liberian shows. So that's how it runs.
Yes, you need to mute that person. You need to mute them when they do that. You need to just cut it off and we move on.
These are, the email you got, I'm sure you also saw that we said corruption, nepotism, and other issues of national concern. I would argue that November, whatever it was, issue, it's an issue of national concern, no matter how long ago it was. But what I do also agree with is that we did not have the time to exhaust that, to discuss that issue fairly on the 2-hour show. But I'm surprised that your brother, Mr. Greaves, and I'm grateful that he's been here longer than 2 hours. So, but with 2 hours is barely enough, not 8 hours, not 10 hours, to discuss that whole quote-unquote issue. So I agree with that as well. But all I want you to know...
you do not blindside, excuse me, you do not blindside your guests by having other people inside that. Then you gave him the full topic and let him be aware that all of these topics are going to be discussed.
Well,
this is my brother, and I love my brother. I don't have people coming on and trying to impress people that he did certain things. We all know what went on in Liberia.
Okay.
Every Liberian knows what went on in Liberia.
Your point is worth taking. All right. Your point is worth taking. Your point is worth taking. Are you done, Ms. Harriet? Greaves, are you done?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. All right. Your point is worth taking. I agree. Hopefully we can all find time, to call a bigger conference at which time we can. Mr. Greaves, do you care to add to your sister's last comment, or just take the last 3 years we'll be out of here?
I came here to discuss the topic, which is corruption. I did not come here to discuss Kafumba and all that. I mean, I did so for us, but I didn't. And frankly, I was taken aback by that. That's not what I came here to discuss.
Right. And I've said that too. From time to time, I've said that. So that's the point I want to make clear. That it came as surprising to you as it did to me. But then I do also understand that the fact that we perhaps noted, corruption, nepotism, and other issues of national concern is a national issue. So that qualifies. That's my point.
Kafumba, if I may say something. When you're a moderator of a program, it's your responsibility to control the dialogue. I didn't come here for a wide-ranging discussion on everything under the sun.
Okay.
The topic I was given, and that's the topic I came to discuss. I answered questions because I didn't want to be rude, but frankly, I feel that as moderator, when people were going off the reservation, going off the topic, you should have just made it very clear and very firm. This is not what we're here for. If you want to discuss this, we'll discuss this at another time in another forum.
Okay.
If I were moderating the program, that's what I would have done.
Okay. All right. Well, that's one view, and I'm definitely sure that will be exactly one way of doing it. But I also respect the way you've dealt with it. I have told my guests, all of my guests in the past, it's perfectly okay to say, I do not want to talk about that. I'm not here for that. I cannot anticipate callers' question. You notice that I myself, I have not asked any question in the direction of Kafumba matter, but it comes from callers, and you cannot expect me to anticipate the questions that they're going to ask. All right. With that said, I agree with you, and if you're offended by questions asked other than corruption and nepotism, my apology for that. It was not deliberate. I don't know these scholars other than the fact that they are all Liberians, but I could not have possibly, anticipated all of these questions. So I'm sorry if you're offended.
I think our people need, when they're discussing something, they need to stick to the topic, not wander off the reservation. That's all I'm saying. I'm not offended in the least. Not in the least.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, we almost out of here. Mr. Jabata, New York, quickly, your final thought, final question, comment, or concern, quickly.
My final comment is that Mr. Greaves, the occasion I was talking about, it was the occasion where we paid some money to enter in New York City, and the president was there to make a presentation at the United Nations, and I hope I was not giving false information but I was present. And when, in fact, you presented the Helen Sirleaf, then Helen Sirleaf, not president, came in the audience, and Judy Bryant was then president of Liberia, interim president of Liberia. And after your presentation, she presented, and she made her statement. So I will leave it like that, and those that were there will listen to us. And I hope if you one day recall the statement that I have just presented, you can then address me. It is easy to find me, but I do recall this happening in New York City when you and her, Sirleaf, went at each other, and it was all due to the corruption that was happening in the Judy Bryant government. And she accused you and Judy Bryant of corruption. And I can say that waxing president of ULA was there, Morris Kofa from Maryland was there. They all came. We attended it, and it was a little battle between you and Helen Sirleaf. And I was concerned, wow, if this battle happened and the woman turned around and hired this person to control a very lucrative organization in Liberia, something must have changed. This man must have changed. This man must have done something remarkable. Maybe it was not true that she was saying. I don't know what happened. I wouldn't have hired you after I have accused you of corruption. Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just do that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Greaves.
First of all, if he is talking, he's unclear about the meeting, but it's strange that he's clear about what she said. If he's talking about a meeting with the UN, that would have been the donor conference. The donor conference was held in January of 2004. The transitional government did not get into office until the middle of October of 2003. So the transitional government had only been sitting for about 2.5 months before the donor conference. So how Mr. Sirleaf would have concluded at that time that the Judy Bryant government was corrupt when it had barely been in office for 2.5 months, I do not know. I suspect that what I'm being told now is pure fabrication. I do not recall the conversation. And if you ask Mrs. Sirleaf today whether she made any such comment about me, I can guarantee you the answer will be no, she did not. So I don't know what you're talking about, but there is no way this conversation could have been held, as you said, because as I said, it would have been around the time of the donor conference. And that was only 2.5 months after the transitional government was seated. And I certainly do not recall any such altercation between Mr. Sirleaf and myself. We have been allies for 30 years. She asked me, and then let's come back to the previous person who was saying that I selected my own board. Again, a misrepresentation of what I said. I said to her, I did not want, because I wanted people on my board are the kind of people that you would normally find on a corporation board. Part of the problem we have in Liberia is people are appointed to the board who have absolutely no qualifications to be on the board of a business. You cannot appoint people who have no experience in business to boards and then expect them to perform. The president selected the individuals. All I asked for is the type of individual that should be on the board. That's all I requested. She selected the individuals that she appointed to her board. So it's a mischaracterization and a misrepresentation of what I said for that gentleman to say I appointed my own board. Nonsense. I did not appoint my board, the president did. But I told her, in my opinion, And that opinion goes not only to LPRC, it goes to all of our public corporation boards. Our public corporations are supposed to be businesses. You look at the boards of corporations in the United States. Who do you see on the board of corporations in the United States? They are business people, bankers, lawyers. You don't put on board people who have absolutely no qualification and no experience to be on a board. A board is supposed to provide guidance to the management. It presupposes that the people on the board, first of all, they understand business. If you don't understand business, for crying out loud, what guidance can you give to the management of a business? And a public corporation is supposed to be a business. A public corporation is not the same as a government agency or ministry. A lot of our people misunderstand that. They think the public corporations are just like ministries. And that is part of the reason why our public corporations today are not performing. Because people get appointed to them who don't have the qualifications. And by qualification, I'm not talking about book degrees. I'm talking about the experience and subject matter knowledge. They don't have it and they're appointed. They think of themselves as civil servants. They're not supposed to be civil servants. They're supposed to be business people. And they run the ministry as though it were a government agency. They don't know what they're doing, and so they fail. There are very few public corporations today that are making any profit. And that is part of the reason. Square pegs in round holes. Wrong people appointed to wrong positions. People who don't have anything in their background or their skill sets to qualify them to be running public corporations. Can you imagine Bill Gates taking a clergyman to be CEO of Microsoft, or a market woman to be on the board of Microsoft? Of course it wouldn't happen. But that's what we do in Liberia. People see board appointments as part of the political spoil system. So people get appointed because of their party affiliation or because of their affiliation to somebody in the government. And they have no business being on a public corporation board because they're not equipped to be on a board. They have neither the experience nor the knowledge to be on a public corporation board. And they have no business being there. Likewise, management. People are appointed to positions, senior positions in public corporations who have zero business background. Zero. And then we expect them to perform? It's disingenuous. Of course they can't perform because there's nothing in their background that has prepared them to perform. The reason why I was able to perform at LPRC is not because I'm any genius, but because I had 40 years of experience, for crying out loud, when I came there. I had experience with corporations all over the world, big and small. That was what equipped me to do what I was able to do at LPRC, to turn around a bankrupt company and turn it into a money-making machine for the government. It was my experience that enabled me to do that. It was not because I'm particularly clever or I've got more degrees. I have a bachelor's degree and I'm a CPA, a member of the Greater Washington Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. It is my experience and background that enabled me to perform, nothing else, no magic. But if I had been an academic or if I had been a civil servant and placed as head of LPRC, I would have probably screwed it up like a lot of other MDs are screwing up public corporations. Not because they're bad people, but they lack the experience. Can you imagine you ask a cook to do brain surgery on somebody, and then when he fails, then you act surprised that he's unable to do brain surgery? Why? Because he doesn't have the skills or the background to do that. And that's the problem we have with public corporations today in Liberia. We have people running those corporations who have neither the background nor the skill, neither the experience nor the skill to perform in those positions.
Okay. All right.
And they are supervised by board of directors of people who are equally lacking in the appropriate experience and appropriate skill sets.
Okay. Mr. Greaves, thank you ever so much. Here is the final thing we're going to do here. I will have you begin your closing remarks here. What I would do, I'll take all these three callers together, and then don't answer them individually. When they are all done, one question per caller. Then you can just begin your closing remark, and in the process, if you can touch on their concerns, questions or comments that they have to make, and that can do it for the night. Is that okay with you, sir?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So, so on the 5741, quickly, your last question, very last one.
Thank you so much. My comment now would be those teams, they got to start playing with our country people. You can't be playing with our people like you're playing football. When you draw one person, you pass the ball to your partner. Those are partners that are in our country there that are playing with our country people. They should stop it. They should stop it. And Mr. Grace, my question down to you, with no condition, will you not accept a job in our government? Yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay, well, you got your answer already.
Absolutely.
So. All right, you said no to that before, and you said no again. So
absolutely not.
Okay, all right. Say it quickly.
Yeah, next one.
Yes, Kafumba, thank you so much. I'll be very brief. First, let me say on the record, I'm disappointed in some of the responses from Mr. Greaves. Rightfully so, he has a right to answer a question he wants to, and he has a right not to answer a question. But the last time I checked, Mr. Greaves is and was and still remains a national figure and a public figure. So in public domain, everything goes. This is not what we talk personal. We're not asking Mr. Greaves about his coffee this morning or what kind of car he drives. That's personal. Yeah, we're talking national issue, and everything goes. So Mr. Greaves has the right to or not to answer a question about national concern, including corruption, the killing of our people, the war that he helped facilitated that he's denying today, talking about is nonsense to accuse him. Well, the only thing I can say to Mr. Greaves, there will come a time, there is coming a time when Mr. Greaves and everybody who supported the bloody civil war will be asked. I hope that time it won't be nonsense, but it will be sense for him to respond to. So I just want to thank you, Kafumba, for bringing Mr. Greaves, and I want to thank Mr. Greaves for coming on to answer a question. But again, I'm disappointed in some of his responses. But again, the public forum, everybody has the right to say what they want to say. But there will be a time where he will not say it's a nonsense, but it will be a sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll hear from the last one here, and then you can begin your closing remark, Mr. Greaves. So the very last one for the night, Mr. Kelebu Gonglo, welcome back to the show. Your final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Kafumba. Firstly, let me just disagree with the last caller, and I agree with Mr. Greaves' concern. Even in this country, when Barack Obama, the President of the United States, appears at the press briefing at the White House, he's there for a specific issue. When journalists bring other issue, it's sidetracked many times. Either he start brushing in a smart way, because that's not what he's there to address. The heading will be there, he's coming to address it. There are multiplicity of issues that we want to address. All these uninformed opinion about others in Liberia. I know Liberian love something that is petite and is not substantive. Generally, that's the Liberian move. The TRC report is there. I'm one of those who sat on Google today and started to Google the name Harry Greaves, and read all the trail, and I did it. Interesting, even in the first draft of the TRC, his name was in the recommendation, but in the final draft, his name was removed. So TRC report that all of our YEM for S4 implementation did give him the leverage. So I think we should put that aside. And the one that we have legal basis to yearn for is a TRC report, as opposed to going to all these petty things about whether he was in Sierra Leone, he was in that, or he was in somebody's bedroom, because those are things that would be like my war against your war. The TRC report is clear. People appear, testify, they took information from them, and they wrote a report. Let's go after the TRC report. That's one comment I have. And the last comment I want to make is simply that, Mr. Greaves, I don't agree with your boasting that you took a corporation from $50,000 or $50 to $10 million. I don't agree with that because, look, that is in the section maritime, Freeport of Monrovia, commissioner, manager director, and maritime commissioner. Those are the flimsy excuses they've used to be paid large sum of money. You know that in Liberia, the manager at the Freeport of Monrovia makes more than $12,000 a month. That is outrageous. What LPRC has no competitor. So you are not competing with other companies, or you are not competing with other companies to raise the revenue. You have a monopoly, on the market. Nobody competes with you. To Freeport of Monrovia, they are not in competition with any port in Monrovia. They are only in competition in Liberia, there's no other port in Liberia that are in competition. So this whole thing this person is racing, that's just bogus. That's just stupidity, shared nonsense. If I, Caleb Gonga, I'm giving managing director position at LPRC, I don't have to have business background. I need to have honesty of purpose, and I need to have some basic education. That's all. I don't even need to have business because that's a complete monopoly. I just need to have the mind not to steal, and I can raise the revenue, probably more than you did. That's why I wanted to clarify, because it is this flimsy excuse that got maritime commissioner making all that money in Liberia, the national port director making all that money in Liberia. You go get there, Nyana in Liberia, every day Twin Harris that came from the United States, they are paying huge sum of money when they are managing total monopoly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Greaves, for your closing remarks, and if you'll be kind to touch on those last comments.
I don't know what this man who just talks about for a living, but clearly he doesn't have any understanding of business. LPRC didn't become a monopoly that I became managing director. It was a monopoly from 1989. I came in there in 2006. That was 16 years later. If it was so easy for LPRC to get the results that I got, why did none of my predecessors get those results? They had monopolies. When I arrived at LPRC, LPRC was making a profit of $1.5 million a year. When I left, LPRC was making a profit of $7 million a year. The question of the results, that is not a matter of conjecture or opinion, sir. It's a matter of fact. There are financial statements that show what a company does. The 100 million is the 10 million I left is not a figment of my imagination, and it is not subject to whether you believe it or not. Just go to the bank, ask for a bank statement. LPRC, we have published accounts, so that the performance of a company is not subject to your whims and caprices. It's a matter of fact. Either you did this or you didn't do that. I don't know if you know anything about business, but businesses publish financial statements. We show their results. It's not a figment of the imagination of the managing director or head of a corporation. Those are statements of fact. So it is a statement of fact that I left $10 million in the bank. Whether you like that or not is your business, but it is a statement of fact. It is a statement of fact that I inherited a company with only $50,000 in the bank. That is a statement of fact. That has nothing to do with your opinion. Whether you believe it or you don't believe it, that has absolutely nothing to do with your opinion. that I paid off $2.3 million of debt that I inherited, that is a statement of fact. That I paid the government $7 million in taxes and dividends, a statement of fact. Now, I can assure you, while I was at LPRC Managing Director, my compensation was $5,000 a month. That was my salary. So if you talk about NPA and other people, talk about them, but do not, you see, we Liberian people, some of us, we have a tendency to make glib generalizations about things we don't know anything about. There is nothing in Liberia that says the salary of a managing director of one corporation is the same as the salary of a managing director of another corporation. So for you to be talking to me about what the managing director of the NPA is earning is irrelevant. That was not my compensation. I will discuss my compensation, and I will go on the record on talking about my compensation, not somebody else's that you are now ascribing to me. And when it comes to earnings, when I left the United States, I was in the top 5% of wage earners in the United States. Vice President of Finance of the 8th largest newspaper, a statement of fact. A statement of fact. I was earning hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary, stock options, and bonuses. That is what I gave up to come to Liberia, to help get Mr. Sirleaf elected. That is not conjecture. That is not something I'm just saying. It's a statement of fact. So, folks, if you're going to make comments, make them on the basis of, make your opinions informed by fact, not some conjecture you have in your head or some preconceived notion you have in your head that is not grounded in fact. That is a very common tendency amongst our people to start off on things that they know absolutely nothing about. They make up facts that are not facts because they want to, it suits the argument they want to make. So when you tell me you don't believe we made $10 million, all I ask you to do is you go to LBDI, even now, 4 years after the fact, ask LBDI to give you a copy of LPRC's statement when I left. Go to the General Auditing Commission, make a phone call, Winsley Nanka. He will confirm to you how much money I left in the bank. Because Winsley, I hired Winsley. I hired Winsley out of Pittsburgh, brought him to Liberia as a chief accountant to understudy the GMAP controller. So, and the president hired him from LPRC to General Audits Commission. But he was there when I was there. And he knows what we did and what we accomplished. Again, base your comments on fact. Do not base your comments on your own imagination. And my closing remarks to people is the fight of corruption is an important fight. And everybody, including people like you abroad, have a role to play. But do your research. You know, do your research. Don't sit there and just dream up facts. Do your research, get your facts, and then you can make a persuasive case for whatever opinion. But don't take the easy way out, which is to sit down in your armchair. You don't do any research. You don't ascertain any facts. But all you do is spout off opinion, uninformed opinion. Do yourself a favor. Make sure your opinion is informed by facts. We have the internet now. You can do lots of research. Lots of research you can do through the internet to marshal the facts. So that when you're speaking from a standpoint of facts as opposed to a standpoint of ignorance. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Harry A. Greaves. I cannot thank you enough for not only honoring our invitation, but for staying way beyond the time that we had anticipated. It's been my pleasing pleasure to have you on. And as I said, if there was anything or things that I did from my end that was not precisely pleasing to you, my sincere apology. It wasn't deliberate. But as I said, we've hosted many senior government officials here and ordinary Liberians alike. And every time we have people like yourself who've been around the Liberian politics for many years, it's expected that many issues come up. I cannot possibly anticipate all of that. But I did nothing deliberate to upset you or any of your family member. If that was the case, I'm sorry. Once again, thank you, and I want to thank our audience for being here. And also remind the audience that we have Judge Melvin Johnson coming out about less than an hour time, 7 o'clock. But I will have to shut down the system and come back on so I can preserve this first recording. I don't want to combine the two recordings, so for that purpose only, I'll have to shut down the computer and then come back, log back on, so that way I can put the two recordings separately, and so that I can upload them up on YouTube or the internet sometime in the future. Mr. Greaves, thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. You have a wonderful night, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.